A worn-out janitor, a veteran, a single dad, fixes a grounded helicopter in minutes. The rich CEO stares and asks, "Where'd you learn that?" That's the spark. He steps from a mop bucket into a glass tower, where workers cheer, but a jealous executive wants him gone. The board whispers, "Drop the janitor or lose the company." He saves a risky test flight, and hope rises. But a stain from his service record, one he thought was cleared, suddenly hits the headlines. Who dug it up? Why now? His teen daughter is watching. The CEO is risking everything, and the man with the mop must fight back with truth, faith, and skill. When the past crashes into the present, will courage and character win over money and power? Or will the people who call him nobody bury him before he can take off? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun hadn't yet peeked over the horizon when Daniel Reyes pushed his mop across the hangar floor, leaving neat, wet trails in its wake. The familiar scent of industrial cleaner mixed with aviation fuel filled his nostrils, a smell that had become as routine to him as his morning coffee. His work boots made soft squeaking sounds against the concrete as he moved in practiced patterns, making sure every inch gleamed. He hummed an old Spanish lullaby, one his late wife Maria used to sing to Elena when she was small. The melody brought both comfort and a gentle ache to his heart. These quiet moments before dawn were his time to think, to remember, and to plan. The parent-teacher conference scheduled for that afternoon weighed on his mind. Elena was doing well in most subjects. She had her mother's sharp mind, but her math grades had been slipping lately. Daniel knew she could do better. She just needed the right encouragement. Just like fixing an engine, he muttered to himself, wringing out the mop. You've got to understand all the parts to make it work right. The empty hangar amplified his footsteps as he made his way to the supply closet. Shelves lined with cleaning supplies greeted him, a stark contrast to the toolboxes he'd managed in the Army. Sometimes, late at night, he still dreamed of those days. The satisfying click of a properly adjusted carburetor, the purr of an engine he'd brought back to life. Daniel checked his watch. 5:47 a.m. He had another hour before the first shift of mechanics would arrive. Plenty of time to finish the floors and maybe tackle those windows that had been bothering him all week. The morning light was starting to creep in through the high windows, casting long shadows across his freshly mopped floor. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Elena. "Dad, don't forget I need 40 for the field trip today." Daniel smiled, typing back with careful precision. "Already put it in your backpack, mija. Have a good day." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his heart warming at the thought of his daughter. Elena was growing up so fast. 15 now, and already showing the same quiet strength her mother had possessed. Though sometimes he caught her looking embarrassed when her friends asked what her father did for a living, she never complained about their modest life. Walking to the far end of the hangar, Daniel began working on a particularly stubborn oil stain. His knees protested as he knelt down, but his hands remained steady as they had always been. The same hands that had once maintained million-dollar military equipment, now working just as diligently with a scrub brush and degreaser. The job might have changed, but his attention to detail hadn't. Each stroke of the brush was purposeful, methodical. He had learned long ago that any job worth doing was worth doing right, whether it was fixing a Black Hawk helicopter or cleaning a hangar floor. His thoughts drifted to the parent-teacher conference again. Miss Thompson, Elena's math teacher, had suggested extra tutoring. The cost made him wince. Another strain on their already tight budget. But Elena's education came first. Maybe he could pick up some extra shifts on the weekends. As he worked, Daniel mentally calculated his expenses for the month. Rent, utilities, groceries, Elena's braces payments. He was making it work, but just barely. Sometimes he wondered what Maria would think of their life now. Would she be disappointed that her Army mechanic husband had ended up pushing a mop? No, he whispered firmly to himself, standing up to inspect his work on the oil stain. She'd understand. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. The stain had finally surrendered to his efforts, leaving the concrete almost as good as new. Daniel allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction as he gathered his cleaning supplies. The hangar floor now gleamed in the strengthening morning light, reflecting the massive space above like a mirror. He wheeled his mop bucket toward the maintenance area, where the drains were located. The wheels squeaked slightly. He'd have to oil them soon. It was the little things like this that others might overlook. But Daniel noticed. He always noticed. The sound of approaching aircraft interrupted his thoughts. Not unusual for this time of morning, but something about the engine noise seemed off to his trained ear. The distinctive whop 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 of helicopter blades, but with an irregular rhythm that made him frown. Moving to the hangar entrance, Daniel watched as a sleek corporate helicopter descended toward the landing pad. Even from this distance, he could tell the machine was struggling. The sound reminded him of a Black Hawk he'd once serviced in Afghanistan, right before it nearly dropped out of the sky. The helicopter managed to land, but not gracefully. Daniel winced at the heavy touchdown, his hands instinctively twitching as if they held tools instead of a mop handle. He could hear the engine's uneven idle even as the rotors began to slow. Several mechanics hurried past him, their toolboxes clanking. Daniel stepped back into the shadows of the hangar, watching as they clustered around the troubled aircraft. He recognized the helicopter's markings. Whitmore Aerospace, one of the biggest companies in the state. The pilot emerged, followed by an elegant woman in a business suit who looked distinctly unhappy. Daniel couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language told the story clearly enough. The mechanics huddled around the engine compartment, their voices growing increasingly frustrated. "Try it again," one of them called out. The pilot climbed back in, and Daniel heard the starter whine. Once, twice, 3 times. But the engine refused to catch properly. Each attempt sounded worse than the last. "It's no use," another mechanic announced, throwing his hands up in defeat. "We're going to need to call in the specialist from the city." Daniel leaned on his mop, listening to the sputtering attempts to start the helicopter. His fingers itched with the desire to help, to dive in and discover what was wrong. He knew that sound, knew exactly what it might mean, but he was just the janitor now, and janitors didn't fix million-dollar helicopters. The voices outside grew more agitated as the mechanics admitted defeat. Daniel could hear their footsteps retreating, probably heading to the office to make those calls. The woman in the suit was speaking sharply into her phone, gesturing at the grounded aircraft in frustration. He gripped his mop tighter, trying to ignore the familiar call of an engine in distress. Sometimes the hardest part of his job wasn't the cleaning. It was staying in his lane, remembering his place. But that helicopter's troubled whine kept pulling at him, like an old friend calling for help. The click of expensive heels against concrete echoed through the morning air as Charlotte Whitmore strode across the airfield. Her tailored navy suit and perfectly styled blonde hair stood in stark contrast to the industrial surroundings. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her exhaustion, though she'd done her best to conceal them with makeup. "Someone explain to me exactly why my $10 million helicopter is sitting here useless when I have a board meeting in 3 hours?" Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of commanding boardrooms. She clutched her leather briefcase tighter, knuckles whitening. The lead mechanic, Ted Barnes, wiped his greasy hands on a rag and stepped forward. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Whitmore, we've checked everything we can think of. The engine's getting fuel. The electrical system seems fine, but something's not right in the startup sequence." Charlotte pressed her lips together, checking her watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. "That's not an answer, Mr. Barnes. That's a list of things you don't know." She walked closer to the helicopter, her heels clicking with each determined step. The morning sun caught the gold W emblazoned on the aircraft's tail. "We've got our best people on it," Ted insisted, gesturing to his team. The other mechanics nodded nervously, tools clutched in their hands like shields. "But this model, it's complicated. State-of-the-art. Sometimes these things happen with new technology. Things don't happen with Whitmore aircraft," Charlotte snapped. "We build the best because we hire the best." She let the implied criticism hang in the air. "Call corporate. Get their maintenance team out here." One of the younger mechanics cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the nearest corporate team is 3 hours away. They're dealing with an issue in Atlanta." Charlotte closed her eyes briefly, fighting back a wave of frustration. The board meeting couldn't be rescheduled, not with the government contract on the line. She'd specifically chosen this small airfield as a refueling stop to save time. Now that decision was backfiring spectacularly. "Try it again," she ordered the pilot, who had been standing quietly to the side. He nodded, and climbed back into the cockpit. The engine whined as it turned over, a sound that made Charlotte wince. After 30 seconds of grinding and sputtering, the pilot shook his head and shut it down. "Miss Whitmore," Ted said carefully, "we could arrange for a car to take you. A 3-hour drive would make me late." Charlotte cut him off. "And Whitmore Aerospace doesn't do late." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. Maybe she could get another helicopter sent from the main facility, but that would take almost as long. The mechanics huddled around the engine compartment again, their muttered conversations becoming increasingly desperate. Charlotte could hear snippets of their discussion, technical terms mixed with growing confusion. "Check the fuel mixture again?" "Already did." "Twice. Maybe the computer's glitching?" Diagnostics came back clean. Charlotte paced along the length of her grounded aircraft, her mind racing through contingency plans. The board was already skeptical about her latest proposals. Showing up late, or worse, not showing up at all, would give them the ammunition they needed to shoot down her ideas. She'd worked too hard, fought too many battles in this male-dominated industry to let a mechanical failure derail her plans. Her father had built Whitmore Aerospace from nothing, and since taking over as CEO 5 years ago, she'd doubled its value. But some board members still saw her as the boss's daughter who'd been handed the keys to the kingdom. The sun climbed higher in the sky as minutes ticked by. Charlotte watched as the mechanics tried increasingly desperate measures, their confidence eroding with each failed attempt. Her phone buzzed with messages from her assistant, asking for updates on her arrival time. "Mr. Barnes," she called out, her patience wearing thin, "I need options. Real ones. Now." Ted straightened up from the engine compartment, his face red from exertion. "Ms. Whitmore, I hate to say it, but without the corporate team," he spread his hands helplessly, "we're just not equipped to handle something this sophisticated. These newer models have systems we've never—" A movement near the hangar caught Charlotte's attention. A man in gray coveralls had paused in his cleaning duties, his mop forgotten in his hands. There was something about the way he was looking at the helicopter, not with the curiosity of a bystander, but with the focused attention of someone who understood machinery. The man, the janitor, she realized, set his mop aside and took a few steps closer. His movements were careful, deliberate. His eyes narrowed as they traced the lines of the aircraft, focusing on something near the tail rotor that the mechanics had apparently overlooked. Charlotte watched him, noting the military bearing in his posture despite his humble uniform. His gray-streaked black hair was neatly trimmed, and even from this distance, she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes. Those eyes weren't seeing a $10 million corporate aircraft. They were seeing a machine that needed fixing. The janitor's hands twitched slightly at his sides, the unconscious movement of someone who is used to holding tools. He tilted his head, studying the angle of the tail rotor with an expert's eye. His expression changed subtly, the look of someone who had just solved a puzzle. Charlotte had seen that expression before, in the faces of her best engineers when they cracked a particularly difficult problem. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what was wrong, and more importantly, how to fix it. The mechanics continued their frustrated debate, oblivious to the janitor's presence. But Charlotte kept watching him, recognizing something in his bearing that spoke of experience far beyond pushing a mop. He took another step forward, his eyes fixed on what must have been the source of the problem. Something about his quiet confidence made Charlotte straighten up. In 15 years of business, she'd learned to trust her instincts about people. And right now, those instincts were telling her that this unassuming janitor might see something her highly paid mechanics had missed. Daniel wiped his hands on his gray coveralls and approached the cluster of frustrated mechanics surrounding the sleek black helicopter. Their faces were etched with defeat as they shook their heads at Charlotte Whitmore, whose normally composed demeanor was cracking under the pressure of being stranded. "Ma'am," Daniel said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the morning breeze, "I might be able to help." The mechanics turned to stare at him, their expressions a mix of dismissal and amusement. One of them, a burly man with a red face, snorted, "No offense, buddy, but if we can't fix it, the janitor sure can't." Charlotte's piercing blue eyes settled on Daniel. She looked him up and down, taking in his worn coveralls and the mop he'd left leaning against the hangar wall. "And what makes you think you can solve this?" There was an edge to her voice, but Daniel detected something else beneath it. Desperation. He'd seen that same look in the eyes of soldiers when their vehicles broke down in dangerous territory. "I was a mechanic in the Army, ma'am. 20 years experience with all kinds of engines. That sound your helicopter's making, I've heard it before." The burly mechanic stepped forward. "Listen, old-timer, this isn't some beat-up Humvee. This is a state-of-the-art aircraft worth more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes. Daniel kept his eyes on Charlotte. "Just need a wrench, ma'am. Won't take more than 15 minutes to check." Charlotte's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her arm as she considered. The morning sun caught the diamond ring on her right hand, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the helicopter's sleek surface. Finally, she nodded. "Give him what he needs." The mechanics exchanged skeptical looks, but one of them handed Daniel a toolbox. He knelt beside the engine compartment, his movements careful but confident. The familiar smell of oil and metal brought back memories of long nights in the motor pool, teaching young soldiers how to keep their vehicles running. "See, right here," Daniel muttered, more to himself than the onlookers. His weathered hands moved with surprising grace through the complicated machinery. "The wiring's good, but this valve..." He reached deeper into the engine. Charlotte stepped closer, her expensive heels crunching on the concrete. "What are you doing?" "Something's not lined up quite right," Daniel explained, his voice steady despite the pressure of her scrutiny. "Sometimes these things shift during flight. Tiny movements you can't see, but they make all the difference." His fingers found what he was looking for, a slight misalignment that would have been nearly impossible to spot without knowing exactly where to look. The mechanics crowded around, their earlier skepticism giving way to curiosity. Daniel worked methodically, adjusting the wiring with practiced precision. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he concentrated, but his hands never wavered. "Hand me that smaller wrench, please," he said, pointing to the toolbox. One of the younger mechanics quickly complied, now watching with rapt attention as Daniel made the final adjustments. Charlotte stood silently, her arms crossed, watching every move. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the airfield. In the distance, other aircraft took off and landed, but here, all attention was focused on the quiet janitor working his magic on the million-dollar machine. "Okay," Daniel said finally, standing up with a slight grunt. His knees protested the movement. He wasn't as young as he used to be. "Try it now." Charlotte nodded to her pilot, who climbed into the cockpit. The tension was palpable as he turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened, and Daniel could feel the weight of doubt pressing down on him. Then the engine coughed once, twice, and roared to life. The massive blades began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, cutting through the morning air with a powerful whoosh. The sound was clean, smooth, without the worrying stutter that had grounded the aircraft. The mechanic stared open-mouthed at the helicopter, then at Daniel, who was already packing away the tools with careful precision. Charlotte's expression had transformed from skepticism to astonishment, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine amazement. She stepped closer to Daniel, her voice soft enough that only he could hear her over the sound of the engine. "Where'd you learn that?" The small-town diner buzzed with early morning activity as Charlotte led Daniel to a corner booth. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, catching the chrome trim of the well-worn tables. The aroma of coffee and bacon filled the air, mixing with the soft clatter of plates and murmured conversations. "Order anything you'd like," Charlotte said, settling into the red vinyl seat. Her tailored business suit looked out of place among the regulars in their work clothes and flannel shirts. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, still wearing his gray coveralls with maintenance stitched above the pocket. "Ms. Whitmore, this really isn't necessary. Please, call me Charlotte." She waved over a waitress wearing a pale blue uniform. "And I insist, you just saved me from missing a crucial meeting in Denver." After they ordered eggs and toast for Daniel, a fruit plate for Charlotte, she leaned forward, her sharp blue eyes studying him. "That was impressive work back there. You didn't even hesitate." Daniel wrapped his weathered hands around the warm coffee mug the waitress had filled. "Just basic troubleshooting, ma'am. The valve alignment was off, and the wiring needed a minor adjustment." "Basic? My top mechanics couldn't figure it out." Charlotte stirred her coffee slowly. "You mentioned the Army taught you." Daniel nodded, his expression softening slightly. 20 years in the service. Started as a grunt, worked my way up to maintenance chief. Helicopters, tanks, anything with an engine. If it was broken, my team fixed it. 20 years is a long time, Charlotte observed. What made you leave? A shadow crossed Daniel's face. He took a long sip of coffee before answering. My wife, Maria. She got sick, needed me home. His voice grew quieter. Cancer took her 3 years ago. Charlotte's professional facade cracked, genuine sympathy showing through. I'm so sorry. The waitress arrived with their food, providing a momentary break in the conversation. Daniel picked at his eggs, then smiled faintly. Maria would have liked this place. She always said diners had the best breakfast in America. You mentioned a daughter? Charlotte prompted gently. Daniel's eyes lit up. Elena, she's 15. Smart as a whip, just like her mother. Straight A's, wants to be an engineer. He pulled out his wallet and showed Charlotte a school photo of a teenage girl with her father's kind eyes and determined expression. She sounds wonderful, Charlotte said. It must be challenging, raising her alone. Some days are harder than others, Daniel admitted. But she's worth every minute. Got a parent-teacher conference this afternoon, actually. He glanced at his watch. Should probably head back to finish my rounds before then. Charlotte set down her coffee cup with purpose. Mr. Reyes, Daniel, what would you say if I offered you a job? Daniel blinked. I have a job. A different job. One that actually uses your skills. Charlotte pulled out a business card and placed it on the table between them. My company needs people who understand machinery the way you do. We're expanding our maintenance training program, and I could use someone with real-world experience to consult. Daniel stared at the embossed card. I don't have the right credentials. No college degree. Just military training. You have something better. 20 years of practical experience and natural talent. Charlotte's voice was firm. It would be temporary at first, 3 months, to see how it works out. Full benefits, significantly better pay than your current position. Daniel ran his thumb along the edge of the card. I don't know. Elena's settled in school here, and I'm not sure I belong in a corporate environment. The main facility is only 40 minutes away. No need to relocate. Charlotte leaned back, studying him. Daniel, I've built my company by recognizing talent. What you did this morning? That's exactly what we need. He picked up the card, reading it carefully. His daughter's face flashed in his mind, her dreams of college, of becoming an engineer herself. The kind of future that would be easier to provide with a better salary. 3 months? He asked finally. Charlotte nodded. To start. If it works out, we can discuss a permanent position. Daniel took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and extended his hand across the table. All right, Ms. Whitmore. I'll give it a try. Charlotte's firm handshake sealed the deal. Welcome aboard, Daniel. And please, it's Charlotte. Daniel Reyes tugged at his borrowed tie, the dark blue fabric feeling like a noose around his neck. His best white shirt, pressed carefully the night before, already felt damp with nervous sweat as he stood before the towering glass headquarters of Whitmore Aviation. The morning sun reflected off the building's sleek surface, making him squint. You can do this, old man, he muttered to himself, remembering his daughter Elena's proud smile when he told her about the consulting job. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, welcoming him into a lobby that seemed bigger than his entire apartment. The security guard at the desk looked up, his expression shifting from professional alertness to barely concealed skepticism as he took in Daniel's appearance. Can I help you? I'm Daniel Reyes. I should be on the list, starting work today. The words felt strange in his mouth. The guard checked his computer, eyebrows rising slightly. Oh, yes, Mr. Reyes. Ms. Whitmore's office called down. He handed over a temporary badge. Floor 32. Inside the elevator, Daniel studied his reflection in the polished steel walls. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, but his face looked weathered, marked by years of early mornings and hard work. Around him, executives in perfectly tailored suits tapped away at their phones, none sparing him a glance. The elevator doors opened onto the 31st floor, revealing an open-plan office space with floor-to-ceiling windows. Modern art adorned the walls, and sleek furniture dotted the space. Daniel felt like he'd stepped onto another planet. Mr. Reyes? A young woman in a crisp blazer approached him. I'm Amanda, Miss Whitmore's assistant. She's waiting for you in the conference room. Following Amanda through the maze of desks, Daniel caught snippets of whispered conversations. That's the janitor she hired? Is this some kind of charity case? Did you see his tie? The conference room was all glass and chrome, with a long table that could seat 20. Charlotte Whitmore stood at the head, talking with 3 men in expensive suits. She smiled warmly when she saw Daniel. "Daniel, welcome to Whitmore Aviation." She gestured for him to join them. "These are our senior executives: James Porter, Head of Operations; Michael Chen, Chief Engineer; and Robert Mills, Head of Human Resources." The men's handshakes were brief and cool. James Porter, a tall man with graying temples, barely concealed his disdain. "Ms. Whitmore tells us you have experience with aircraft maintenance," Porter said, his tone suggesting he was talking about a hobby rather than years of military service. Daniel straightened his shoulders, remembering his Army days. "Yes, sir. 8 years as a military aircraft mechanic. Specialized in helicopter maintenance and emergency repairs in combat zones." "Well," Michael Chen said, his voice carefully neutral, "we have very specific protocols here at Whitmore Aviation. Our systems are quite advanced." Charlotte interrupted smoothly, "Which is exactly why Daniel's practical experience will be valuable. Sometimes fresh eyes see what we miss." She turned to Daniel. "Ready to see the factory floor?" The elevator ride down to the manufacturing level was tense. Porter and Mills made a point of checking their phones, while Chen studied a tablet. Charlotte stood beside Daniel, her presence somehow reassuring. The factory floor was a vast space filled with the familiar sounds of machinery and tools. Half-assembled helicopters stood in various stages of completion. This, at least, felt like home to Daniel. A group of mechanics looked up as they approached. Daniel recognized the type immediately: skilled workers who knew their worth but were used to being talked down to by management. "Team," Charlotte addressed them, "this is Daniel Reyes. He'll be consulting with us on some new maintenance procedures. I expect you to show him the same respect you'd show any other member of management." The mechanics exchanged glances, sizing Daniel up. One of them, a younger man with oil-stained coveralls, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of troubleshooting the rotor assembly on the new prototype. Been at it for hours." Daniel's eyes were drawn to the helicopter in question. Even from here, he could see something wasn't quite right with the angle of the main rotor head. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, already rolling up his sleeves. Porter cleared his throat. "Mr. Reyes, perhaps we should discuss protocols first." But Daniel was already moving, muscle memory taking over. He climbed up to the rotor assembly, his experienced hands running over the components. The mechanics gathered around, watching curiously. "See this?" Daniel pointed to a barely visible misalignment. "The tracking rod's off by about 2 millimeters. Easy to miss if you're just following the manual, but it'll cause vibration issues in flight." The young mechanic who'd spoken earlier leaned in. Yeah, I see it now. But the computer diagnostics didn't catch it. Sometimes the best diagnostic tool is right here." Daniel tapped his temple with a small smile. "In the field, we didn't always have fancy computers. You learned to trust your eyes and hands." He reached for a wrench. "Here, let me show you a trick I learned in Afghanistan. Makes adjusting these a lot easier." As Daniel demonstrated the technique, more mechanics gathered around. Their initial skepticism melted away as they watched his sure hands work. He explained each step clearly, drawing from years of experience teaching younger soldiers. "See how the rod seats more naturally now?" He guided the young mechanic's hands. "Feel that difference?" The mechanic nodded enthusiastically. "That's amazing. We've been fighting with these alignments for months." Daniel felt the tension in his shoulders ease. Here, among the tools and machines, the borrowed tie didn't matter. The polished executive stares faded into the background. This was what he knew, what he was good at. He glanced up to find Charlotte watching him, a satisfied smile on her face. The other executives huddled together, whispering, but Daniel barely noticed. For the first time since walking into the glass tower, he felt like he belonged. The mechanics were already asking more questions, pointing out other issues they'd been struggling with. Daniel found himself settling into a familiar teaching rhythm, the same way he used to train new recruits. The knowledge flowed naturally, years of experience finding voice in simple, practical explanations. "Sir," the young mechanic said, respect evident in his voice, "would you mind taking a look at the secondary systems too? We've got some other issues we could use your insight on." The afternoon light slanted through the windows of Whitmore Aviation's headquarters as Daniel wiped the grease from his hands. He'd spent hours with the mechanics, solving problems and sharing techniques. His borrowed tie hung loose around his neck, and his sleeves were rolled up past his elbows. "Mr. Reyes?" Amanda, Charlotte's assistant, appeared at his side. "Ms. Whitmore would like you to join the afternoon board meeting." Fifth floor conference room. Daniel's stomach tightened. He looked down at his disheveled appearance. "Like this?" Amanda gave him a sympathetic smile. "She said to come as you are." The elevator ride felt longer this time. Daniel tried to smooth his wrinkled shirt and tighten his tie, but there was no hiding the day's work on his clothes. The conference room doors were heavy oak, unlike the glass partitions elsewhere. Inside, leather chairs surrounded a massive mahogany table where about a dozen executives sat in expensive suits. Charlotte stood at the head of the table, elegant in her navy business suit. "Ah, Daniel, please join us." She gestured to an empty chair near her. As Daniel moved to sit down, a man with silver-streaked hair and a perfectly tailored Italian suit looked up from his tablet. His steel-gray eyes took in Daniel's appearance with undisguised contempt. "Ms. Whitmore." The man's voice was smooth as silk but carried an edge. "Is this really necessary? Surely maintenance issues can be handled through proper channels." Charlotte's smile remained steady. "Richard, I'd like you to meet Daniel Reyes. He's already made significant improvements to our maintenance procedures today." Richard Hale. Daniel recognized the name from the company's leadership photos in the lobby, leaned back in his chair. "Ah, yes, the janitor who fixed your helicopter." His lips curled slightly. "How quaint." A few chuckles rippled around the table. Daniel felt his face grow warm, but he kept his expression neutral, the way he'd learned to do during military dress-downs. "Tell me, Mr. Reyes," Richard continued, his tone dripping with false politeness, "what prestigious institution granted you your engineering degree?" More snickers followed. Daniel sat straight in his chair. "No degree, sir. Just 20 years of hands-on experience, including 8 years maintaining military aircraft in combat zones." "Combat zones?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yes. I heard something about that. Didn't that end rather unfortunately?" Daniel's hands clenched under the table. The old pain of his wrongful discharge, though later overturned, still stung. "I think we're getting off track," Charlotte interjected. But Richard wasn't finished. "I mean, really, Charlotte." He turned to address her directly. "Bringing in a janitor as a consultant? What's next? Shall we ask the cafeteria staff to review our financial strategies?" Laughter erupted around the table, no longer contained. Daniel saw several executives exchanging knowing looks. "Just a janitor," someone muttered loud enough to be heard. "Perhaps he can teach us his mopping technique," another added, triggering more laughter. Daniel had faced mockery before, in the schoolyard as a poor kid, in the army from officers who looked down on enlisted men, in life as a widowed father trying to make ends meet. He began to rise, ready to excuse himself with what dignity he had left. "Enough!" Charlotte's voice cut through the laughter like a steel blade. The room fell silent. She placed both hands on the table and leaned forward, her blue eyes intense. "Let me be very clear. Daniel Reyes solved in 5 minutes what our qualified mechanics couldn't fix in hours. His practical knowledge has already identified 3 critical improvements to our maintenance procedures." She looked directly at Richard. "While you've been sitting in this air-conditioned office questioning his credentials, he's been down there actually fixing our problems." Richard's smile faded. "Charlotte, surely you can't be serious about—" "I'm absolutely serious," she cut him off. "And since you're so concerned about qualifications, Richard, let me remind everyone that Daniel's military service record includes the successful maintenance of over 200 aircraft in active combat zones, with 0 failures under his watch. How many of you can say you've kept people alive under those conditions?" The silence in the room grew heavier. Daniel saw some executives shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Now," Charlotte continued, her voice level but carrying an unmistakable warning, "we're here to discuss the implementation of new maintenance protocols. Daniel will present his findings, and I expect everyone to listen with the same respect you'd give any other consultant. Is that clear?" No one spoke, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Richard Hale's face had hardened into a mask of barely contained anger. He exchanged glances with several board members, a silent communication that spoke volumes. "Daniel," Charlotte gestured to him. Please share what you observed today. Daniel stood slowly, aware of every hostile eye in the room. But as he began to speak about the technical issues he'd discovered, he found his voice growing stronger. This, at least, he knew with absolute certainty. He spoke about practical solutions, cost-saving measures, and safety improvements, letting his expertise show through simple, clear explanations. A few of the younger executives started taking notes, their initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest. But Richard Hale and his allies sat rigid in their chairs, their expressions growing darker with each point Daniel made. When he finished, Charlotte nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Daniel. I think that gives us plenty to consider." She turned to address the room. "We'll reconvene tomorrow to discuss implementation." Meeting adjourned. As the executives filed out, Daniel caught the whispered conversations and dark looks. Richard Hale paused at the door, turning to give both Daniel and Charlotte a long, measured look before departing. The small kitchen in Daniel's modest home filled with the aroma of chicken enchiladas, his wife Maria's recipe that he'd finally mastered after years of practice. Elena sat at their worn wooden table, pushing rice around her plate with her fork, her textbook stacked beside her dinner. "So they really let you work on the helicopters?" Elena asked, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. "Like the expensive ones?" Daniel smiled, serving himself another helping. "Not just work on them, I got to teach the mechanics some tricks I learned in the Army. Things about rotor alignment that could save them hours of trouble." "That's amazing, Dad." Elena's enthusiasm dimmed slightly as she set down her fork. "But what did the other people say? You know, the ones in suits?" Daniel paused, the memory of Richard Hale's sneering face fresh in his mind. He carefully chose his words. "Some of them weren't too happy. They're used to people with fancy degrees, not someone like me." "That's not fair," Elena protested, her voice rising. "You know more about machines than anyone I know. Just because you're a—" She stopped herself. "A janitor?" Daniel finished gently. "Honey, there's nothing wrong with honest work. Any job done well deserves respect." Elena pushed her plate away. "But they don't respect it, do they? I heard Sofia Martinez's mom talking at school. She works in accounting at Whitmore Aviation. She said some of the executives were making jokes about you." Daniel's heart tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Listen to me, Elena. People will always talk. But what matters is what we do, not what they say." "I just don't want them to hurt you," Elena whispered, her eyes downcast. "Like at your last job, when that supervisor—" "That was different," Daniel interrupted softly. "Ms. Whitmore, she's different. She sees what people can do, not just their titles." Elena looked up. "Really? Even though she's so rich and important?" Daniel nodded, remembering Charlotte's fierce defense of him in the boardroom. "Sometimes the most important people are the ones who remember what it's like to work their way up." "But what if they try to make you quit?" Elena's voice trembled slightly. "We need the money for college, Dad. I know we do." Daniel reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand. "Hey, look at me. Have I ever let you down?" Elena shook her head. "The Army taught me more than just fixing machines. It taught me that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared." He smiled. "And right now, what's right is showing those mechanics how to keep their aircraft running safely. That's worth more than any fancy title." Elena managed a small smile. "Mom would be proud of you." "She'd be proud of both of us," Daniel corrected, his voice soft. "Now, finish your dinner. You've got that math test tomorrow." As Elena turned back to her textbooks, Daniel cleared the dishes, his movements automatic as his mind wandered. He thought about the way the mechanics had listened to him today, their initial skepticism turning to respect as he showed them techniques that could save hours of work. That felt right, felt like he was truly making a difference. Across town, in the luxurious private dining room of the Capitol Club, Richard Hale swirled his bourbon, his expression dark. Around the polished mahogany table sat 3 other board members, their plates pushed aside as they leaned in to listen. "It's embarrassing," Richard spat. "Charlotte's turning our company into a charity case. First, she hires this janitor as some kind of consultant. Next, she'll probably want to put him on the board." Margaret Wells, the oldest board member, pursed her lips. She's always been stubborn about these working-class pet projects of hers. "Remember that scholarship program she started? This is different. Richard insisted. She's bringing him into strategic meetings, having him train our certified mechanics. Do you know what that does to our reputation? Thomas Bradford, a newer board member, cleared his throat. The mechanics seem to like him. Production efficiency is up 12% since he started showing them his techniques. Richard's eyes narrowed. That's not the point. We have standards to maintain. Image, prestige. What happens when our military contractors find out we're letting a janitor touch their $1 million aircraft? What do you suggest? Asked James Cooper, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Charlotte owns controlling interest. We can't simply remove her. A slow smile spread across Richard's face. No, but we can make her position uncomfortable. Start with this Reyes character. Push him out, and she'll look foolish for championing him. Then we can start questioning her judgment on other matters. The press would love that, Margaret mused. The Ice Queen CEO and her handyman savior. Make it ridiculous enough, and shareholders will start asking questions. Exactly. Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. I know someone at the Herald. Very discreet. Very good at finding interesting background details on people. And Charlotte? Thomas asked quietly. Richard's smile turned predatory. By the time we're done, she'll wish she'd stuck to her corporate memos and left the janitors to their mops. The other board members exchanged glances, then nodded slowly. Richard raised his glass in a mock toast, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. The private dining room grew quieter, filled only with the soft clink of expensive crystal and the whispered plotting of powerful people who refused to let a simple mechanic threaten their carefully ordered world. Charlotte's heels clicked against the polished marble floor of her corner office. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across her mahogany desk. She paused, noticing a cream-colored envelope placed carefully at the center of her workspace. No return address, no name, just Ms. Whitmore, written in precise block letters. She picked up the envelope, her manicured fingers running along its sealed edge. Something about it made her stomach tighten. Opening it carefully, she pulled out a single sheet of paper and unfolded it. Your father built this company on excellence, not charity. A janitor doesn't belong in our boardroom. Step carefully, or you might find yourself joining him on the outside. Charlotte's hands trembled slightly as she set the note down. She sank into her leather chair, her usual confidence wavering. The threat was clear enough. Some of her board members weren't just unhappy, they were plotting against her. She reached for her phone, then stopped. Who could she trust? Richard Hale's smirking face flashed in her mind from yesterday's meeting. The way other board members had laughed at his cruel jokes about Daniel, the sideways glances they'd given her when she defended him. A knock at her door made her jump. Come in, she called, quickly sliding the note into her desk drawer. Daniel stepped in, wearing a clean button-down shirt that was slightly too big for his frame. Good morning, Ms. Whitmore. I wanted to show you the training schedule I worked up for. He stopped mid-sentence, noticing her expression. Is everything okay? Charlotte studied him for a moment. His honest face, his capable hands that had fixed her helicopter when no one else could, the quiet dignity in his bearing despite yesterday's humiliation. She made her decision. Close the door, Daniel, please. He did as asked, then sat in one of the visitor chairs across from her desk. Charlotte pulled out the note and handed it to him. This was on my desk this morning. Daniel read it slowly, his weathered face growing serious. You're being threatened because you gave me a chance? His voice was soft, but she heard the hint of anger beneath it. Not just threatened, Charlotte said, standing to pace near the windows. They're trying to force me out. The board needs a supermajority to remove me as CEO. Until now, I've always had enough loyal supporters to prevent that. She turned to face him. But if they can paint me as someone who's destroying company standards, who's letting emotion cloud my judgment, then I should resign, Daniel said firmly. I won't be the reason you lose everything you've built. No. Charlotte's voice was sharp, surprising them both with its intensity. She walked back to her desk and leaned forward, palms flat against its surface. My father didn't build this company on excellence alone. He built it on seeing potential in people others overlooked. He started as a mechanic himself. Did you know that? Daniel shook his head. The board's forgotten that. They've forgotten what makes us strong isn't just our technology or our contracts. It's our people. She straightened up, squaring her shoulders. I saw what you did on the factory floor yesterday. Those mechanics respect you. They listen to you, not because of your title, but because you know what you're talking about. But your company is worth fighting for, Charlotte interrupted. The right way, not by giving in to threats and prejudice. She walked around the desk and sat in the chair next to his, their eyes level. I'm not just fighting for your job anymore, Daniel. I'm fighting for what this company stands for. Will you help me? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying the note in his hands. Finally, he looked up at her. In the Army, we had a saying, leave no one behind. You didn't leave me behind when others laughed. I won't leave you behind now. Charlotte felt something warm bloom in her chest, respect, gratitude, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. Then we're in this together. They think they can use you against me, make me look weak. But they don't understand. Giving someone a fair chance isn't weakness, it's strength. What's our next move? Daniel asked. First, we document everything. That note, yesterday's meeting, any future incidents. Second, we prove them wrong. You keep doing what you're doing with the mechanics. Build relationships. Show results. I'll handle the board politics. Daniel nodded, his expression determined. You know they'll come at us harder. Let them try, Charlotte said, her voice steady. They think this is about a job title. It's not. It's about dignity, respect, the kind of company, the kind of people we want to be. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the challenge ahead settling over them. Through the windows, the morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the shadows in the office. The note lay between them on the desk, its threat now transformed into a rallying cry for something bigger than either of them had expected when the day began. The early morning light filtered through the high windows of Whitmore Aviation's main hangar, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Daniel Reyes stood before a group of mechanics, his weathered hands moving with purpose as he demonstrated the proper way to diagnose a faulty fuel injection system. See this connection here? Daniel pointed to a specific part of the engine laid out on the workbench.
Most people waste hours checking the obvious parts first.
But 9 times out of 10, the problem starts right here, in this tiny fitting. His voice was soft but clear, carrying easily to the dozen mechanics gathered around him. The workers leaned in closer, their faces showing genuine interest. Some nodded, while others scribbled notes in their worn pocket notebooks. These were skilled professionals, yet they watched Daniel with the attention of eager students. I learned this back in Afghanistan, Daniel continued, his fingers tracing the metal components. When you're in the field, you can't afford to waste time. Sometimes you've got minutes, not hours, to get a vehicle running again. He paused, remembering those intense moments when lives had depended on his quick thinking. Mark, a veteran mechanic with 20 years of experience, raised his hand. But the manual says we should always start with a full diagnostic sequence. That's what management insists on. Daniel smiled, understanding the concern. The manual's not wrong, he said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. But there's a difference between following procedures and knowing your machines. It's like getting to know a person. After a while, you can tell what's wrong just by listening. To demonstrate, he reached for a socket wrench and made a slight adjustment to the fitting. The change was almost imperceptible, but when he tested the system, it hummed to life smoothly. Several mechanics exchanged impressed looks. Throughout the morning, Daniel moved from station to station, sharing tips and tricks he'd learned over his years of service. He showed them how to identify wear patterns that indicated deeper problems, how to improvise solutions with limited resources, and most importantly, how to trust their instincts when something didn't feel right. The computer diagnostics are great tools, he explained while helping a young mechanic named Tommy troubleshoot a stubborn hydraulic system. But they're just that, tools. Your experience, your hands, your ears, those are your best instruments. During lunch break, Daniel sat with the mechanics in their break room rather than heading to the executive cafeteria upstairs. He unwrapped his simple sandwich while listening to their stories and concerns about their work. They spoke freely around him, treating him as one of their own rather than a consultant from management. You know, Mr. Reyes, said Jose, a senior mechanic with salt and pepper hair. We've had plenty of experts come through here before, but none of them ever got their hands dirty like you do. Daniel shook his head. Just Daniel, please. And I'm no expert. I'm just sharing what I've learned the hard way. After lunch, Daniel organized a hands-on workshop focusing on helicopter maintenance. He set up several stations where mechanics could practice the techniques he'd shown them earlier. The hangar came alive with the sounds of tools clanking and voices calling out questions. Take your time, he encouraged them. Speed comes with confidence, and confidence comes from understanding what you're doing. As the afternoon wore on, Daniel noticed a significant change in how the mechanics approached their work. They seemed more assured, more willing to trust their judgment. They asked thoughtful questions and shared their own experiences, turning the session into a collaborative learning environment. Near the end of the day, while helping to clean up the workshop area, Daniel overheard two mechanics discussing how much time they'd save using his methods. Their enthusiasm made him smile, reminding him of his own early days learning the trade. Just as he was preparing to leave, Tommy, the young mechanic from earlier, approached him. The kid had been quiet all day, diligently taking notes and practicing each technique. Daniel, Tommy said, his voice earnest. I just wanted to thank you for today. You showed us stuff the executives never bothered to explain. They just tell us to follow the manual and meet our quotas. Daniel felt a warm sensation in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't pride exactly, but something deeper. For the first time since walking into this building, he felt like he truly belonged. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in Charlotte's corner office as the evening sky darkened outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Papers and folders were spread across her broad mahogany desk, where she and Daniel sat reviewing maintenance proposals. The city lights twinkled below, creating a peaceful backdrop to their work. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. His tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. These safety protocols make sense, but the cost estimates seem high. Charlotte nodded, pushing aside a stack of papers. She looked different in the softer evening light, more human somehow, less like the stern CEO who commanded boardrooms. Her blazer hung on the back of her chair, and she'd kicked off her heels under the desk hours ago. You're right, she said, leaning back in her chair. The vendors know they can charge premium rates because most executives don't understand the technical details. She smiled slightly. That's why I'm glad to have someone who actually knows what things should cost. Daniel glanced at his watch. It's getting late. I should probably head home to Elena. Just a few more minutes? Charlotte asked, her voice carrying an unusual note of vulnerability. I'd like your input on something else. Daniel settled back in his chair, sensing this wasn't about work anymore. Charlotte stood and walked to the window, arms crossed as she gazed out at the city. You know, everyone assumes I was born with a silver spoon, she said quietly. That daddy handed me this company on a platter. Daniel remained silent, giving her space to continue. The truth is, I lost both my parents when I was 12. Car accident. Her voice wavered slightly. I was raised by my aunt, who did her best, but I learned early that if I wanted anything in life, I had to fight for it myself. Daniel's expression softened with understanding. That couldn't have been easy. Charlotte turned back to face him, her usual polish stripped away by memory. I put myself through engineering school, worked 3 jobs. Started at the bottom of this company as an intern. She smiled ruefully. The board members who look down on you? They used to look at me the same way, the girl who didn't belong. But you proved them wrong, Daniel said. Every single day. Charlotte returned to her chair. I still have to. Being a woman in this industry, I can never show weakness. Never let them see me uncertain. She ran a hand through her hair. Sometimes it's exhausting, always having to be the untouchable ice queen. Daniel leaned forward. My late wife Maria used to say something about that. She'd say, strength isn't about never showing cracks. It's about keeping going, even when the cracks show. Charlotte's eyes met his. She sounds wise. She was. Daniel smiled at the memory. A kindergarten teacher. She taught me more about courage than the army ever did. Tell me about her? Charlotte asked softly. Daniel's face lit up as he shared stories about Maria. Her terrible cooking but amazing heart. How she'd sing off-key while gardening. The way she could make any child feel special. Charlotte found herself laughing at his descriptions of their early dating disasters. She sounds wonderful, Charlotte said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes after a particularly funny story involving a disastrous first dinner date And an escaped pet iguana. She was. Daniel's voice held warmth rather than sadness now.
You know, she would have liked you.
Really? Charlotte raised an eyebrow. The corporate ice queen? Daniel shook his head. No, the woman who fights for what's right, who gives people chances. He gestured around the office. Who stays late working on safety protocols because she actually cares about her workers. Charlotte felt her cheeks warm at his words. She couldn't remember the last time someone had seen past her careful facade so easily. Well, she said, trying to lighten the moment, I think she would have appreciated how you've managed to make me laugh more in the past 10 minutes than I have in months. That's not saying much, Daniel teased. I've seen statues with better senses of humor. Charlotte gasped in mock offense and tossed a paperclip at him. It bounced off his chest as they both dissolved into laughter again. The sound of their shared amusement filled the office, transforming the sterile corporate space into something warmer, more human. In that moment, they weren't CEO and consultant, or rich and working class. They were just two people finding unexpected connection in the quiet of a late night. Charlotte caught her breath, still smiling. You know, I can't remember the last time I talked to someone like this. Really talked, I mean. Me neither, Daniel admitted. Except with Elena, of course. How is she doing with all this? Charlotte asked, genuine concern in her voice. Better now. She was worried at first, but seeing me actually using my skills again. He smiled. She said she's proud of me. She should be. Charlotte's voice was soft but certain. Her father is an extraordinary man. Their eyes met across the desk, and something shifted in the air between them, a quiet recognition of trust given and received. The city lights sparkled beyond the windows, and neither felt any urgency to end the moment. The late-night conversation had stripped away their usual roles, revealing the simple truth of two people who understood what it meant to fight for respect, to lose love, to keep going. In the comfortable silence that followed, a delicate thread of connection began to weave between them, tentative, yet undeniably real. The morning sun cast long shadows across the airfield as technicians scurried around the sleek prototype helicopter. Its freshly painted exterior gleamed, bearing Whitmore Aviation's logo prominently on its side. This wasn't just any demonstration. The government contract at stake could change everything for the company. Daniel stood off to the side, watching the preparations with practiced eyes. He'd spent enough time in hangars to know when something felt off. The executive team huddled nearby in their press suits, checking tablets and muttering among themselves. Richard Hale paced back and forth, barking orders into his phone. Check the fuel lines again, one of the technicians called out. We can't afford any mistakes today. Charlotte emerged from the office building, her usual confidence somewhat subdued. She wore a Navy business suit and carried herself with determined grace, but Daniel noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. This demonstration meant everything to her company. How are we looking? She asked, joining Daniel. Almost ready, he replied, but his attention was fixed on something else. Through the open maintenance panel, he'd spotted an unusual configuration in the wiring harness. Mind if I take a closer look? Charlotte gestured for him to proceed. Daniel approached the helicopter, ignoring the dismissive glances from nearby executives. He knelt beside the open panel, his experienced hands gentle as they traced the wire routing. There's something wrong with this connection, he said, pointing to where two crucial systems interfaced.
The redundancy circuit isn't properly grounded.
Richard Hale strode over, annoyance clear on his face. We've had our best engineers check everything twice. The demonstration starts in 30 minutes. It'll take 5 minutes to fix, Daniel insisted, keeping his voice steady. If this isn't corrected, we don't have time for a janitor's paranoia. Richard cut him off. The helicopter passed all safety checks. Charlotte stepped forward. Daniel, are you sure about this? He met her eyes, unwavering. Yes, ma'am. I've seen this kind of oversight before. In the Army, it caused a near crash. The test pilot approached, overhearing the conversation. What exactly are we talking about here? Daniel explained the technical issue in simple terms, pointing out how the current configuration could lead to electrical system instability during certain maneuvers. The pilot frowned, clearly concerned. Mr. Hale, Charlotte said, give him the 5 minutes. Richard's face reddened. This is ridiculous. We're about to demonstrate to government officials and you're listening to 5 minutes, Charlotte repeated firmly. Daniel didn't waste time. He retrieved his tools and got to work, his movements quick and precise. The watching crowd grew as word spread about the last-minute adjustment. Some executives whispered and smirked, but the mechanics watched with interest. True to his word, Daniel finished the repair in just under 5 minutes. He double-checked his work and closed the panel. "It's ready now." The government officials arrived right on schedule. Men and women in dark suits, carrying clipboards and tablets. Charlotte greeted them professionally, while Daniel stepped back into the crowd of workers. The test pilot completed his pre-flight checks, and the demonstration began. At first, everything went perfectly. The helicopter lifted smoothly into the morning sky, executing a series of impressive maneuvers. The officials nodded approvingly, making notes. Richard Hale's smug smile grew with each successful moment. Then came the high-stress portion of the demonstration. The pilot pushed the helicopter into a series of complex movements designed to showcase its advanced capabilities. Suddenly, warning lights flashed in the cockpit. The helicopter lurched, its systems struggling. Panic erupted on the ground. Executives froze, horror-struck. The government officials backed away from the landing zone, their faces grave. But Daniel was already moving. He grabbed the radio from the ground controller's hand. "Test Flight 1, this is ground. That redundancy circuit is trying to compensate. Switch to backup electrical and reduce power to non-essential systems." The pilot's voice crackled through, tense but professional. "Copy that, ground." Daniel continued giving calm, clear instructions, drawing on years of experience. "Ease off on the collective. Let the backup system stabilize before attempting landing approach." Charlotte stood beside him, her face pale but composed as she watched Daniel guide the pilot through the crisis. The helicopter's erratic movements gradually smoothed out. "You're clear for approach," Daniel said. "Take it slow and steady." The entire airfield held its breath as the helicopter descended. It touched down with a gentle bump, its systems now functioning normally. The pilot emerged, shaken but unharmed. One of the government officials approached Charlotte. "Ms. Whitmore, I'd like to know exactly what happened here." Before Richard could interject, Charlotte gestured to Daniel. "Mr. Reyes identified and corrected a potential issue before takeoff. When complications arose, his expertise guided our pilot to safety. He's one of our most valuable team members." The official turned to Daniel. "Military background?" "Yes, sir. Army aviation. 15 years. The official nodded thoughtfully. "The way you handled that situation. Impressive work. Very impressive indeed." Richard Hale stood to the side, his face a mask of barely contained fury as he watched the officials gather around Daniel, asking technical questions about the electrical system modification he'd made. The mechanics who had witnessed everything nodded to each other, their respect for the former janitor evident in their expressions. Charlotte touched Daniel's arm lightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You just saved more than a helicopter today." Daniel simply nodded, uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful his instincts had prevented disaster. Around them, the airfield buzzed with activity as technicians began their post-flight checks, and the government officials huddled to discuss what they'd witnessed. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the helicopter that stood as testament to one man's expertise and dedication. As the government officials dispersed into small groups, discussing what they'd witnessed, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the mechanics gathered near the helicopter. "Way to go, Daniel," someone shouted, and others quickly joined in, clapping and whistling. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under the attention, his weathered face flushing slightly. The test pilot strode over and gripped his hand firmly. "I owe you one, sir. That could have gone very differently if you hadn't caught that wiring issue." More workers crowded around, patting Daniel on the back and expressing their gratitude. These weren't just empty congratulations. There was genuine respect in their eyes. They'd watched him work alongside them, teaching and helping without any hint of superiority, and now they'd seen his true expertise in action. "That's the kind of experience you can't learn in a classroom," one of the senior mechanics declared, nodding appreciatively. "Military training and real-world know-how, that's what saved us today." Charlotte stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. Her blue eyes sparkled with unmistakable pride as she addressed the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she projected her voice clearly across the airfield, "what you witnessed today wasn't just quick thinking. It was expertise, dedication, and courage in action." She turned to face Daniel directly. Mr. Reyes spotted a potentially catastrophic issue that our standard protocols missed. He had the conviction to speak up, despite resistance, and then guided our pilot to safety when complications arose. This is exactly the kind of excellence Whitmore Aviation stands for. The gathered employees burst into another round of applause. Daniel noticed several of the government officials nodding in agreement, making notes on their tablets. One of them was already on the phone, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. "I just did what needed doing," Daniel said quietly to Charlotte. "Anyone with the right training would have—" "No," Charlotte interrupted gently. "Not anyone would have spoken up when faced with opposition. Not anyone could have remained so calm under pressure." Her voice softened. "You're special, Daniel. I knew it the day you fixed my helicopter, and you've proven it every day since." Their eyes met for a moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Daniel felt his heart skip a beat at the warmth in her gaze. Around them, the celebration continued, as workers shared their perspectives on what had happened. "Did you see how steady he was on the radio?" one of the younger mechanics exclaimed. "Cool as ice. Remember when he first showed up?" another chimed in. "Some folks thought he was just here as a favor. Shows what they knew." The maintenance crew chief stepped forward, a gruff veteran who rarely handed out praise. "In 30 years of aviation, I've never seen anyone handle a crisis situation better. You've got a gift, Reyes. Don't let anyone tell you different." As the morning sun climbed higher, more company employees emerged from the office building, drawn by the commotion. Word of Daniel's actions spread quickly, and soon the crowd had doubled in size. Someone from PR was already taking photos, while others rushed to document the technical details of the incident. Charlotte's assistant appeared with coffee and pastries, turning the gathering into an impromptu celebration. The atmosphere was electric, with relief and triumph. Even some of the executives who had previously dismissed Daniel now approached to shake his hand, though their smiles seemed somewhat forced. Near the helicopter, the government officials conferred with Charlotte. Their expressions were serious but approving, and several times they glanced in Daniel's direction with evident respect. One official made a point of walking over to where Daniel stood. "Mr. Reyes," the official said, extending his hand. "That was exemplary work today. The kind of real-world experience and judgment you demonstrated is exactly what we look for in our contractors. I think you'll be hearing from us very soon." Daniel accepted the handshake modestly. "Thank you, sir. Just doing my job." "If this is how you do your job," the official smiled, "then Whitmore Aviation is very fortunate to have you." Elena, Daniel's daughter, would be so proud when she heard about this. He could already imagine her face lighting up as he told her how he'd helped save the day. After so many years of struggling to rebuild his life, of facing doubt and dismissal, this moment felt like validation of everything he'd worked for. Charlotte made her way back to his side, practically glowing with satisfaction. "The officials are impressed," she said quietly. "Very impressed. I think we can expect that contract to come through." "That's wonderful news," Daniel replied, genuinely happy for her. He knew how much this meant to her company. "It's wonderful news for all of us," she corrected him, touching his arm lightly. "This is your victory too, Daniel. Don't forget that." The celebration continued around them, with people breaking into small groups to discuss the morning's events. The mechanics were already analyzing the technical aspects of what had happened, while others shared their perspectives on how the crisis had unfolded. From the edge of the crowd, Richard Hale watched the scene unfold. His expensive suit seemed to bristle with barely contained fury as he observed Daniel receiving congratulations and praise. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension. The muscle in his jaw twitched as he watched Charlotte beam at Daniel with undisguised admiration. The man who had opposed Daniel's last-minute inspection, who had dismissed him as just a janitor, now stood isolated from the celebration. His face was a mask of cold calculation, as workers who normally scrambled to curry his favor now gravitated toward Daniel instead. Each cheer, each handshake, each smile directed at Daniel seemed to fuel Richard's growing rage. His eyes narrowed as he observed Charlotte leading Daniel toward a group of important clients, introducing him with evident pride. The triumph of the moment only served to deepen Richard's determination to destroy everything Daniel had gained. The small ice cream parlor on Main Street glowed with warm yellow light as the sun began to set. Daniel held the door open for Elena, breathing in the sweet smell of waffle cones and vanilla. The little bell above the door chimed, just like it had when Elena was small enough to ride on his shoulders. "Pick whatever you want, mija," Daniel said, his voice soft with contentment. After the intensity of the day's events, being here with his daughter felt like coming home. Elena pressed her nose against the glass display case, her dark eyes scanning the colorful array of flavors. "Even a triple scoop?" Daniel chuckled. "Even a triple. Today's special." Mrs. Martinez, who had owned the shop for 20 years, smiled at them from behind the counter. "I heard about what happened at the airfield today, Daniel. The whole town's talking about it." Elena beamed at her father. "My dad saved a helicopter. And all those important people." Daniel ducked his head, feeling his cheeks warm. "Just doing my job, Dad." Elena rolled her eyes. "Stop being so modest. You were amazing." She turned to Mrs. Martinez. "He figured out what was wrong when nobody else could. Even the fancy mechanics couldn't see it." Mrs. Martinez nodded approvingly as she scooped Elena's chosen combination, chocolate fudge, mint chip, and cookie dough, into a waffle cone. "Your father's always been a smart one. I remember when he fixed my freezer unit 5 years ago. Wouldn't take a penny for it either." Daniel ordered a simple vanilla cone for himself, but Mrs. Martinez added a drizzle of hot fudge on the house. They settled into their favorite booth by the window, the one where Elena had done her homework countless afternoons while waiting for Daniel's janitorial shift to end. "You know what, Dad?" Elena said between bites, a small spot of ice cream on her nose. "Today at school, I told everyone about your new job at Whitmore Aviation." Daniel paused, his cone halfway to his mouth. He knew how much Elena had struggled with telling her friends about his work as a janitor. "Yeah? How'd that go?" "It was amazing." Her eyes lit up. "Maria's dad works at the airfield too, and he'd already told her about how you fixed Mrs. Whitmore's helicopter. Everyone thought it was so cool. Jenny even asked if you could come talk to our engineering club about aircraft mechanics." Something tight in Daniel's chest began to loosen. He'd spent so many years seeing the shadow of disappointment in Elena's eyes when her friends asked what her father did for a living. Not that she'd ever complained, she was too kind for that. But he'd known. "I'm just glad I can make you proud, sweetheart." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Dad." Elena set down her cone, her expression suddenly serious. "I've always been proud of you, even when you were just a janitor." She made air quotes with her fingers. "You never gave up. You worked so hard even when people weren't nice about it. And you always made time for me no matter how tired you were." Daniel had to blink hard against the sudden moisture in his eyes. "Your mama would be proud of you, you know. The way you've grown up so strong and kind." Elena smiled, a touch of sadness in her eyes. "She'd be proud of both of us." She took another bite of ice cream, then added, "And I think she'd really like Mrs. Whitmore, too." Daniel nearly choked on his cone. "What makes you say that?" "Oh, come on, Dad." Elena grinned. "I saw how you looked when you mentioned her at dinner last week, and Maria said her dad told her that Mrs. Whitmore defended you in front of all those stuck-up executives. Charlotte, Mrs. Whitmore, she's just my boss, Elena. She's been kind to give me this opportunity, that's all." "Sure, Dad." Elena's grin widened. "Whatever you say." They finished their ice cream as the sky outside deepened to purple. Through the window, Daniel could see stars beginning to appear. For the first time in years, he felt like he was truly providing the life his daughter deserved. Not just surviving, but showing her that second chances were possible, that hard work and integrity could still mean something in this world. "Hey," he said as they stood to leave, "what do you say we go to that science museum in the city this weekend? The one with the flight simulator you've been wanting to try?" Elena's face lit up. "Really? But I thought, isn't it expensive?" Daniel smiled, thinking of the consulting fee Charlotte had insisted on paying him. "We can afford it now. And you deserve it. Your grades have been excellent this quarter." Elena threw her arms around him, nearly knocking him back into the booth. "You're the best dad ever." As they walked to the car, Elena chattering excitedly about the museum exhibit she wanted to see, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. The weight of past struggles seemed lighter somehow, as if the day's triumph had helped him finally begin to shake off old shadows. Across town, in a dimly lit bar called The Anchor, Richard Hale sat in a corner booth, nursing a glass of expensive scotch. The ice clinked against the crystal as he checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. The journalist was late. Finally, A man in a rumpled suit slipped into the seat across from him. "Mr. Hale? Sorry I'm late. Traffic was hell." Richard's lip curled slightly at the man's appearance, but he kept his voice smooth. "Not a problem, Mr. Parker. I trust you understand the sensitive nature of what we discussed on the phone?" "Of course." Parker glanced around furtively. "You mentioned something about a dishonorable discharge?" Without a word, Richard reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope. He slid it across the table, careful to keep it in the shadows. Parker opened the envelope, scanning the documents inside. His eyebrows rose. "This is about Daniel Reyes? The guy everyone's calling the hero of Whitmore Aviation?" "Indeed." Richard took another sip of scotch. "Those papers tell quite a different story about our hero. Everything's verified. Multiple sources." The journalist's fingers tightened on the envelope. "This could be big. That's what I'm counting on." Richard placed several $100 bills on the table. "I trust you'll handle it appropriately." Parker tucked both the envelope and the money into his jacket. "It'll be in tomorrow's edition, front page." Daniel's shoes clicked against the polished floor of Whitmore Aviation's lobby, the sound echoing in the unusually quiet space. His morning coffee from the corner shop grew cold in his hand as his eyes caught the newspaper someone had left sprawled on the reception desk. There it was, in bold black letters that seemed to punch him in the gut. "Whitmore's janitor consultant dishonorably discharged." Below the headline was a grainy photo of him in his Army uniform, much younger, from what felt like a lifetime ago. The receptionist, Sarah, who had grown friendly with him over the past weeks, wouldn't meet his eyes. She shuffled papers unnecessarily, her shoulders tense. "Good morning, Sarah," Daniel said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Morning, Mr. Reyes," she mumbled, still not looking up. As he walked toward the elevator, phones buzzed in people's hands. Workers who had celebrated with him yesterday now stepped aside, creating a path of isolation. Some whispered behind their hands, others just stared. The proud confidence he'd felt after yesterday's triumph crumbled with each step. Inside the elevator, Daniel pulled out his own phone. Messages from Elena filled the screen. "Dad, are you okay? My friends are sending me links to articles." His hands shook as he typed back. "I'm fine, honey. Don't worry." The doors opened to the factory floor, usually bustling with activity and friendly greetings. Today, the mechanics he'd worked alongside fell silent as he passed. Jim, the head mechanic who'd become something of a friend, gave him an apologetic look before turning away. "They got it wrong," Daniel wanted to shout. "It wasn't like that." But the words stayed locked in his throat. At his temporary desk in the corner of the engineering office, more newspapers waited. Someone had deliberately placed them there. The articles went into painful detail about his discharge, twisting the truth into something ugly. They called him unstable, dangerous, unfit for corporate responsibility. "How the mighty have fallen," came a smooth voice from behind him. Richard Hale stood there, immaculate in his designer suit, a false look of concern on his face. "Such a shame when the past catches up with us, isn't it?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "You did this." "Me?" Richard's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "I merely helped the truth come to light. The board has a right to know who they're dealing with." He adjusted his silk tie with manicured fingers. "Though I must admit, the press ran with it rather enthusiastically." Before Daniel could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Charlotte. "My office. Now." The walk to the executive floor felt like marching to his own execution. Every step brought back memories of that day in Afghanistan, the misunderstanding that had nearly ruined his life, the months it took to clear his name. But the damage had been done. The discharge was reversed, but the shadow remained. Outside Charlotte's office, raised voices carried through the heavy wooden door. He recognized several board members, their tones sharp with accusation. "This is exactly what we warned you about," one voice boomed. "The company's reputation is at stake," said another. Daniel's hand hesitated on the doorknob. Through the frosted glass, he could see shapes moving, gesturing wildly. His throat felt dry as desert sand. The door burst open before he could turn the handle. Charlotte stood there, her face flushed with anger, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. Behind her, the board members sat around the conference table like a panel of judges, with Richard at the head, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Daniel," Charlotte said, her voice tight with controlled fury. Not at him, he realized, but at the situation, at the betrayal. "Miss Whitmore, he managed to say, falling back on formality in front of the hostile audience. She stepped aside to let him in, closing the door with a decisive click. The board members stared at him like he was something unpleasant they'd found on their expensive shoes. Papers were scattered across the table. More newspapers, printouts of online articles, his military records. "How could you keep this from us?" demanded one board member, a woman with steel gray hair and piercing eyes. "The discharge was overturned," Daniel said quietly. "I was cleared of all charges." "After months of investigation," Richard interjected, standing up. "Months during which your unit had to function without leadership because of your incident." "That's not how it happened," Daniel started, but Richard talked over him. "The facts are clear," Richard said, his voice dripping with false regret. "You abandoned your post during a critical moment. Men could have died." "I was trying to save them." The words burst from Daniel before he could stop them. The memory flooded back. The intelligence about civilians in the target zone, the radio malfunction, the split-second decision to delay the operation. He'd been right, but the brass hadn't seen it that way. Not at first. "Please," Richard sneered. "A janitor playing at being a hero, just like yesterday with that little stunt during the test flight." He turned to the board members. "We cannot allow someone with this kind of history to remain in any position of responsibility." Charlotte stepped forward, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. Her eyes blazed as she faced Richard. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, watching the confrontation unfold. Richard's smug smile widened as he turned to the board. "I move for the immediate termination of Mr. Reyes' consulting contract," he announced. "All in favor?" Hands began to rise around the table. But Charlotte wasn't done. She planted herself behind her desk, her knuckles white as she gripped its edge, staring down the room full of people who thought they could control her. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, casting her in silhouette, a woman standing firm against the tide of prejudice and politics that threatened to sweep away everything she believed in. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Daniel's modest home as he sat at the kitchen table, his work badge still clipped to his shirt pocket. The events of the day played through his mind like a bad movie he couldn't stop watching. "Mr. Thompson from HR had been professional but firm. "We think it's best if you take some time off while we sort this out." The front door opened, and Elena's footsteps echoed through the hallway. Daniel's heart sank. She must have seen the news by now. Sure enough, when she entered the kitchen, her eyes were red and puffy. "Why didn't you tell me, Dad?" Elena's voice cracked as she dropped her backpack on the floor. "I had to find out from Jenny Martinez at school. Her dad showed her the article this morning." Daniel pushed back from the table and stood up, reaching for her. "Elena, honey, don't." She stepped away from him. "Everyone at school was talking about it. They said my dad was kicked out of the army in disgrace." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Is it true?" Daniel's shoulders slumped. "Sit down, sweetheart. Please, let me explain." Elena reluctantly took a seat across from him, wrapping her arms around herself like she used to do when she was little and scared. "It happened during my last deployment," Daniel began, his voice soft but steady. "We were stationed at a forward operating base in Afghanistan. I was lead mechanic for our vehicle pool." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The memories he'd tried so hard to bury came rushing back. "There was an officer, Captain Reynolds. He ordered me to clear some vehicles for patrol, but I found critical problems with the brake systems. They weren't safe to drive." Daniel's hands clenched into fists on the table. "He didn't want to hear it. Said we couldn't delay the mission." Elena leaned forward slightly, her anger giving way to curiosity. "I refused to sign off on them," Daniel continued. "The captain got angry, said I was undermining his authority. He tried to order another mechanic to clear them, but I stopped it." He took a deep breath. "The next thing I knew, I was being charged with insubordination." "But that's not fair," Elena protested. "You were trying to protect people." Daniel nodded. "The investigation took months. Meanwhile, I was sent home with a dishonorable discharge." "Your mother?" His voice caught. "She fought so hard to help me clear my name. She believed in me when nobody else did." Elena's eyes softened at the mention of her mother. "What happened then?" 3 months after I got home, they found documentation proving I was right. The vehicles had major defects that would have put lives at risk. Captain Reynolds had been cutting corners to improve his record. Daniel's voice grew quiet. "They reversed the discharge, made it honorable. But by then, Mom was already sick. Elena finished for him. Daniel nodded, wiping moisture from his eyes. The stress of everything. It didn't help her condition. And even though my name was cleared, people remembered the scandal more than the truth. It's why I took the janitor job when we moved here. Simple work, no questions asked. Elena stood up and walked around the table. This time, when Daniel reached for her, she let him pull her into a hug. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you before," he whispered into her hair. "I wanted to protect you from all that. And honestly, I was ashamed. Not of what I did. I'd make the same choice again. But ashamed that I couldn't give you and your mother the life you deserved." "Dad," Elena's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "You don't have to be ashamed. You did the right thing." They held each other for a long moment before Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes. "What about Miss Whitmore? Does she know?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "I was sent home before I could talk to her." The board members looked pretty pleased with themselves, though. Elena's face hardened. "They're just like Captain Reynolds, aren't they? Care more about looking good than doing what's right." Daniel sighed. "It's not that simple, honey. But yeah, sometimes it feels that way." They made a quiet dinner together, neither having much appetite. Elena did her homework at the kitchen table instead of in her room, as if wanting to stay close to him. When she finally went to bed, she hugged him extra tight. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered, "no matter what anyone says." Later, in his bedroom, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, holding the photo of his late wife that he kept on his nightstand. The moonlight streaming through the window caught the glass of the frame, making it gleam softly. "I tried, Maria," he whispered. "I tried to make things better for her. For us." His voice broke. "Now I've lost it all again." He set the photo down and knelt beside his bed, clasping his hands together. The prayer came naturally, though his voice shook with emotion. "Lord, give me strength," he whispered. "I don't know how to fix this. Elena says she's proud of me, but I see the hurt in her eyes. She trusted me and I kept this from her." He paused, struggling to find the words. "This job, it was a chance to be more than just the guy who mops floors. A chance to use the skills you gave me, to make our girl proud." Tears slid down his cheeks as he continued his prayer. "I thought maybe this time would be different, that the past would stay in the past, but it follows me like a shadow." His shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I need your guidance, Lord. I need to know what to do next." The room remained quiet except for his ragged breathing. The weight of the day, the shame, the loss, the painful conversations, pressed down on him like a physical thing. He had lost his daughter's trust and his chance at a better life, all in one brutal day. Daniel remained on his knees, praying in silence, as the moon cast long shadows across his bedroom floor. The mahogany-paneled boardroom felt colder than usual as Charlotte Whitmore took her seat at the head of the table. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, but it brought no warmth to the hostile faces surrounding her. Richard Hale sat to her right, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Let's begin," Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the tension knotting her stomach. She smoothed her silk blouse, a gesture of composure she'd learned early in her career. "Indeed," Richard said, sliding a thick folder across the polished table. "We have several matters to discuss regarding recent leadership decisions." Charlotte opened the folder, her eyes scanning the first page. Her throat tightened as she read the proposed amendments to her executive powers. They wanted to restrict her ability to make personnel decisions, require board approval for any consultants, and limit her authority over day-to-day operations. "This is unnecessary," she said, closing the folder firmly. An older board member, James Peterson, cleared his throat. "The Daniel Reyes situation proves otherwise. You brought a janitor, a man with a dishonorable discharge, into our corporate offices. Made him a consultant without proper vetting. The press is having a field day." "Daniel saved our government contract," Charlotte countered. "His discharge was later cleared." "The damage is done," Richard interrupted. "Our stock has dropped 3 points since the story broke. Major shareholders are concerned about your judgment." Charlotte looked around the table, seeking any friendly faces. She found none. These men had worked with her father, had watched her grow up in this company. Now they gazed at her with disappointment and derision. "You're embarrassing yourself, Charlotte," said Margaret Wells, the only other woman on the board. "Defending this man, it's beneath you and beneath this company." "What's beneath this company is how quickly you've forgotten his contributions," Charlotte shot back. He solved problems your highly paid engineers missed. He connected with our workforce in ways. He's a janitor. Richard slammed his hand on the table. And you're letting some misguided emotional attachment cloud your judgment. Your father would never. Don't. Charlotte's voice cut like steel. Don't you dare tell me what my father would do? The room fell silent. Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat, feel the weight of 12 pairs of eyes watching her. The motion has already passed, James said quietly. The amendments take effect immediately. Additionally, he pulled out another document. We're implementing a probationary period for your position as CEO. Charlotte's fingers gripped the arms of her chair. You can't be serious. 3 months, Richard said, clearly enjoying himself, during which time all major decisions must receive board approval. If we're not satisfied with your performance and your ability to maintain appropriate professional boundaries, we'll be forced to consider other leadership options. Charlotte wanted to scream, to throw the papers back in their faces. Instead, she sat perfectly still, her face a mask of calm she didn't feel. Is that all? One more thing, Richard added. Mr. Reyes is to have no further contact with this company. His consultant position is terminated, effective immediately. Security has already collected his belongings. The casual cruelty of it twisted in Charlotte's chest. They hadn't even let Daniel pack up his own desk. If there's nothing else, Charlotte said, rising from her chair, I have work to do. Charlotte, Margaret called as she reached the door. We're doing this for your own good, for the company's good. Charlotte didn't respond. She walked through the executive floor, past curious eyes and whispered conversations, straight to her office. Her assistant started to speak, but Charlotte held up a hand, unable to deal with anything else at that moment. She closed her office door and stood at the window, looking out over the city she'd helped build. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Hours passed as she answered emails, made calls, tried to focus on anything but the morning's humiliation. Finally, well past midnight, Charlotte found herself staring at Daniel's empty chair across from her desk. It still held the indent of where he'd sat just days ago, discussing improvements to their maintenance protocols. She remembered how his eyes lit up when talking about machines, how his quiet confidence had nothing to prove, but everything to give. The office felt emptier without him, not just because of his absence, but because of what it represented: the triumph of prejudice over merit, of fear over progress. The board hadn't just attacked Daniel. They'd attacked everything Charlotte believed about leadership and human potential. She touched the chair's worn leather, remembering their late-night conversations about family, loss, and rebuilding. Daniel had shown her that true strength wasn't in titles or boardroom power plays, but in the dignity with which one faced life's challenges. The city lights twinkled beyond her window, a constellation of artificial stars. Charlotte sank into her own chair, exhausted but clear-minded. She couldn't give up, not on Daniel, not on her company, not on the vision of leadership that valued character over status. The board might have stripped her powers, but they couldn't strip her conviction. Daniel's empty chair stood as both rebuke and reminder. Rebuke for a system that judged people by their past instead of their potential. Reminder that some battles were worth fighting, even when victory seemed impossible. Charlotte stared at that empty chair, feeling the weight of all that had been lost, but also the stirring of something stronger: determination. The morning sun cast long shadows across Daniel's small front yard as Charlotte's luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. She sat for a moment, taking in the modest, single-story house with its well-maintained garden and freshly painted shutters. It was a home that spoke of care and pride, despite its simplicity. Charlotte smoothed her skirt and grabbed her handbag, feeling oddly nervous. This wasn't a corporate meeting or a board presentation. This was personal. She walked up the short concrete path and knocked on the door. Daniel opened it, surprise flickering across his tired face. He wore jeans and a faded blue work shirt, his silver-streaked dark hair slightly disheveled. "Ms. Whitmore," he said quietly. "I wasn't expecting." "Charlotte," she corrected gently. "May I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course. Sorry about the mess. Elena's already at school and I haven't." He gestured vaguely at a few breakfast dishes in the sink. "Please," Charlotte said, "don't apologize." She followed him into the small but tidy kitchen, where morning light streamed through a window over the sink. Family photos lined one wall: Daniel in his army uniform, his late wife's bright smile, Elena at various ages. "Can I offer you some coffee?" Daniel asked, already reaching for a clean mug.
"It's not fancy, just regular."
"Regular coffee would be perfect," Charlotte said, settling into a kitchen chair. She watched as Daniel moved around the small space, his movements careful and precise, even in this simple task. The coffee maker gurgled softly, filling the silence between them. Finally, Daniel set 2 mugs on the worn kitchen table and sat down across from her.
"I appreciate you coming by,"
he said, "but I understand why the board wants me gone. The scandal, the headlines." "No," Charlotte cut in firmly. "I'm not here to accept your resignation or to say goodbye." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, leaning forward. "I'm here because you're exactly what my company needs. What I need." Daniel stared into his coffee.
"Even after everything that's come out?"
"Especially after everything that's come out," Charlotte said. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You know, when I lost my parents young, everyone thought I was too inexperienced to run the company. They wanted to push me aside, protect me from myself." A bitter smile crossed her face. "But that's not what I needed. I needed someone to believe in me." Daniel looked up, meeting her eyes.
"This is different."
"Is it?" Charlotte asked. "The board, the press. They're judging you without knowing the full story. Just like they judged me for being young, female, too soft. But I proved them wrong." She reached across the table, nearly touching his hand but stopping just short. "You can too." "My discharge," Daniel began, "was later overturned," Charlotte finished. "But you've never told the whole story, have you? Not even to Elena." Daniel pushed back from the table, standing to pace the small kitchen. "It's not that simple. What happened over there? People don't understand unless they've been there." "Then help them understand," Charlotte said softly. "The workers already respect you. The mechanics trust your judgment more than any executives. Your story, the real story, could change everything." Daniel stopped at the window, looking out at his small garden. "And if they mock me? If Elena has to hear people laughing at her father again?" Charlotte stood, moving to stand beside him. "Then we'll face it together. But I don't think that's what will happen. People recognize authenticity, Daniel. They respond to truth." He turned to look at her, and for the first time, Charlotte saw the weight of years of silence in his eyes. "I've spent so long trying to protect Elena from this part of my past," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time to trust her with the truth," Charlotte suggested. "Trust all of us." Daniel returned to the table, sitting heavily in his chair. The coffee had grown cold, but he took a sip anyway. "You really believe in me that much?" "I believe in what I've seen. A man who fixes things others can't see are broken. Who teaches with patience instead of arrogance. Who saved my company's reputation without taking credit." Charlotte's voice grew stronger with each word. "Yes, I believe in you that much." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle ticking of a wall clock. Daniel traced the rim of his coffee mug with one finger, lost in thought. Charlotte waited, knowing this moment required patience. Finally, Daniel looked up, a new resolve settling over his features. "Okay," he said quietly. "You're right. It's time to tell the whole story. Not just for me, but for Elena, for the other veterans who might be carrying similar burdens." He took a deep breath. "I'll do it." The company auditorium buzzed with whispers and skeptical glances as employees filed in for the mandatory assembly. Rumors had spread like wildfire since Daniel's scandal broke. And now everyone from executive board members to maintenance staff packed the rows of seats, waiting to see what would happen next. Daniel stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. He'd borrowed it from his neighbor again, wanting to look presentable despite feeling like his world was crumbling. Through the curtain, he could hear the shuffle of hundreds of feet and the low murmur of conversations. Charlotte appeared beside him, her presence steady and reassuring. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "Yes, I do." Daniel squared his shoulders. "For Elena, for myself, maybe even for all the other people out there who've been judged before anyone bothered to hear their story." The stage lights felt hot and harsh as Daniel walked to the podium. Richard Hale sat in the front row, arms crossed, a smug smile playing at his lips. But Daniel didn't focus on him. Instead, he looked at the faces of the mechanics he'd worked with, the people who'd welcomed his knowledge before they knew about his past. "My name is Daniel Reyes," he began, his voice quiet but clear in the microphone. "Most of you knew me first as the janitor who fixed Ms. Whitmore's helicopter. Some of you know me as the consultant who's been working with the maintenance crews. And now, thanks to recent headlines, you know me as the man with a dishonorable discharge." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But none of those labels tells the whole story. So today, I'd like to tell you who I really am." Daniel gripped the edges of the podium, drawing strength from its solidity. "I enlisted in the Army right out of high school. Became a mechanic because I loved fixing things, making broken machines work again. Met my wife Maria when she was stationed at the same base. We had our daughter Elena, and for a while everything was perfect." His voice grew softer, more reflective. "Then came the war. During my second tour, there was an incident. A civilian vehicle approached our checkpoint too fast. Protocol said to stop it by any means necessary. But I saw something the others didn't. A family inside. A child in the back seat. I hesitated, broke protocol. My commanding officer saw it as insubordination, endangering the unit. The audience sat completely still now, hanging on every word. The discharge came quick. They didn't wait for explanations. By the time the investigation cleared me months later, the damage was done. The story was out there, twisted and incomplete. Maria," his voice caught. "Maria never got to see my name cleared. Cancer took her while I was still fighting to restore my honor." Daniel looked out at the sea of faces, seeing understanding begin to replace judgment in many eyes. "So, I became a janitor. Honest work, steady pay for Elena. I didn't mind the job. There's dignity in keeping things clean, in making spaces better for others. But I never stopped fixing things, never stopped learning, never stopped believing that one day I'd find a way to show Elena that her father was more than other people's whispers said he was." He straightened his shoulders. "The mistake that got me discharged? It wasn't following protocol. The mistake was thinking that rules matter more than human lives. That paperwork matters more than people. The family in that car lived because I hesitated, and if I had to do it all over again knowing what it would cost me, I'd make the same choice." Tears glistened in some employees' eyes now. Even a few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier certainty wavering. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm not even asking to keep my job here. I'm just asking you to understand that every person has a story, that sometimes what looks like failure from the outside might be courage from the inside, that maybe, just maybe, we should judge people by their actions and their character, not by the labels others put on them." Daniel's voice grew stronger, more confident. "I've spent weeks working alongside many of you, teaching what I know, learning what you know. Not once did anyone care that I was just a janitor when I was helping solve problems. Because that's what matters. Not titles, not past mistakes, but what we can do to help each other be better." He looked directly at Richard Hale now. "You wanted everyone to know about my discharge? Well, now they know everything. The full story. The truth. And I'm not ashamed anymore." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a single person began to clap. Others joined in, slowly at first, then faster. The applause built like a wave, growing louder and stronger until it filled the entire space. Workers stood up, one by one, then in groups, until nearly everyone was on their feet. Daniel saw mechanics he'd worked with wiping tears from their eyes. He saw secretaries nodding in understanding, security guards standing tall in respect. Even some board members were standing, though Richard Hale remained seated, his smug expression replaced by confusion. The applause continued, washing over Daniel like a cleansing rain, years of shame and hidden pain finally releasing their grip on his heart. In that moment, he wasn't a janitor, or a consultant, or a man with a troubled past. He was simply himself, Daniel Reyes, standing in his truth at last. The morning after Daniel's heartfelt speech, the Whitmore Aviation headquarters hummed with an energy unlike anything before. In the factory's break room, mechanics huddled around coffee cups, their usual tired expressions replaced with determined frowns. "It ain't right what they did to him," said Mike Thompson, a veteran mechanic of 20 years. He crushed his empty paper cup in his fist. "Daniel taught me more in 2 weeks than those suits upstairs did in 2 decades. Around him, heads nodded in agreement. Sarah Chen, lead technician on the helicopter maintenance team, stood up from her chair. We should do something. Show the board they can't just throw away good people because they don't fit their fancy image. Word spread through the building like electricity. By mid-morning, dozens of workers had gathered in the main lobby holding handmade signs. Stand with Daniel. Character over class. Integrity matters. Charlotte watched from her office window, her hands clasped behind her back. The crowd below grew larger by the minute. Her assistant hurried in, slightly out of breath. Ms. Whitmore, you need to see this. She handed Charlotte her tablet. The emails started coming in an hour ago, hundreds of them. Charlotte scrolled through message after message from shareholders. Many were from smaller investors, family operations, and pension funds that had backed Whitmore Aviation since its early days. Each letter expressed support for her leadership and praised her defense of Daniel. Your father built this company on merit, not prejudice, one longtime shareholder wrote. We stand with you and Mr. Reyes. Down in the lobby, Richard Hale pushed through the growing crowd, his usually impeccable suit wrinkled from shoving past protesters. Get back to work, he shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the chants. What's going on here? Demanded board member William Stevens, catching up to Richard. His face had gone pale as he watched more employees join the demonstration. Control your people, Hale, Stevens hissed. This is becoming a PR nightmare. Richard's phone buzzed. Another board member texting. 3 major clients had called, concerned about the company's treatment of a veteran employee. The press had picked up the story of worker solidarity. In the cafeteria, Elena sat with a group of administrative assistants who had taken their lunch break early to join the protest. She couldn't stop smiling as she heard them defend her father. Did you know he stays late every Friday to help the night shift crew? One woman said. Never asks for credit. Just does it because it's right. And remember when he fixed the ventilation system? Another added. The board wouldn't approve the budget, but Daniel figured out a way to repair it anyway. Saved the company thousands, and all they did was mock him. The protest spread to social media. Workers shared stories of Daniel's quiet kindness and expertise. Stand with Daniel started trending locally, then nationally. Veterans groups picked up the story, sharing Daniel's full military record, including documents showing his discharge had been wrongfully filed and later corrected. Richard stormed into the boardroom, where several members sat watching news coverage on the wall-mounted television. Their faces showed growing concern. We need to contain this, Richard insisted, but his usual commanding tone wavered. Contain what exactly? Asked Margaret Wilson, the oldest board member. She removed her glasses and fixed Richard with a stern look. The fact that we persecuted a good man? Or that our workers are showing more integrity than we did? This isn't about integrity, Richard snapped. It's about maintaining standards. Standards? Margaret interrupted. Like honesty? Fairness? Because those seem to be in short supply up here lately. 2 other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They'd supported Richard's push against Daniel and Charlotte, but now the tide was turning. The company's stock had actually risen since the protest began. Investors apparently approved of a corporation where workers stood up for their own. Outside Charlotte's office, her assistant intercepted another board member who had previously aligned with Richard. Actually, Ms. Whitmore's about to take an important call, she said smoothly. But I can tell her you're reconsidering your position on the Daniel Reyes situation. The board member hesitated, then nodded. Yes, perhaps we acted hastily. Richard's phone buzzed again and again. Messages from his allies on the board, walking back their support. The PR department warned of growing media pressure. Human Resources reported that employee productivity had actually increased. Workers were determined to prove their worthwhile, also supporting Daniel. In the lobby, the crowd had swelled to include office workers from every department. They shared stories of how Daniel had helped them, taught them, encouraged them. His humility and expertise had touched every corner of the company. I heard he's been fixing the coffee machines on his own time, someone said. He showed me how to maintain my car engine, added another. Saved me hundreds in repair bills. The protest remained peaceful but grew more organized. Workers took turns holding signs so others could return to their duties. They coordinated lunch breaks to maintain a constant presence. Their message was clear. They valued substance over status, character over class distinction. Richard watched his carefully constructed power play crumble, Board members who had eagerly joined his campaign against Daniel now avoided his calls. Those who had laughed at his jokes about the janitor now questioned his judgment. "This isn't over," he muttered, straightening his tie with shaking hands. But even he couldn't ignore the shift in the air, the way respect for his authority had evaporated like morning dew. One by one, his allies fell away. Some cited concerns about public image. Others admitted they'd been wrong about Daniel. A few simply stopped returning Richard's increasingly desperate messages. In her office, Charlotte received another update from her assistant. 3 more board members have requested meetings, Miss Whitmore. They say they want to revisit recent decisions. Charlotte allowed herself a small smile. She thought of Daniel's quiet strength, his refusal to be bitter even when wronged. He had taught them all something about dignity and resilience. The revolution wasn't loud or violent. It grew from whispered stories of kindness, from small acts of courage, from workers who decided that integrity mattered more than hierarchy. Like Daniel himself, it was humble but unstoppable. Richard stood alone in his office, watching his influence dissolve. His phone had gone quiet. His allies had vanished. Outside, the sound of protesters still filled the air, their voices united in support of a man who had never sought power but had earned something far more valuable: respect. Daniel stood at his kitchen sink, washing dishes from dinner as the setting sun painted orange streaks across his modest kitchen. The events of the day, his public speech, the workers' support, the changing tide at Whitmore Aviation still felt surreal. The gentle clink of plates and warm, soapy water helped ground him in the familiar routine of home. Behind him, Elena's footsteps padded softly on the worn linoleum floor. He turned to find his daughter looking at him with eyes that seemed older, wiser than her 15 years. "Dad?" Her voice was soft but steady. "What is it, sweetheart?" Daniel dried his hands on a dish towel, giving her his full attention. Elena crossed the small kitchen in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce hug. The force of it made him step back slightly, but his arms automatically encircled her shoulders. She pressed her face against his chest like she used to do when she was little. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," she whispered into his worn work shirt. "What you did today, telling everyone the truth about what happened in the Army, about Mom, about everything that was really brave." Daniel's throat tightened. He rested his chin on top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I was scared you'd be embarrassed," he admitted quietly, "having everyone know about the discharge, about me being a janitor." Elena pulled back just enough to look up at him, her expression fierce. "Embarrassed? Dad, you're the bravest person I know. You got up in front of all those people and told the truth, even though you knew some of them might still look down on you." Daniel smiled, though his eyes felt damp. "When did you get so wise, Mija?" "Must have learned it from somewhere." She grinned, then grew serious again. "You know what meant the most to me? When you talked about Mom, and how after she died, you took any job you could find just to keep us going. How being a janitor wasn't about status, it was about love." Daniel's chest ached with a mixture of grief and pride. "Your mother would be so proud of the young woman you're becoming, Elena. She always said you had her spirit." Elena's eyes glistened. "Tell me more about her. About when you first met?" Daniel guided them both to sit at the small kitchen table, where they'd shared so many meals and conversations over the years. The dishes could wait. "Well," he began, settling into his chair, "I was fresh out of basic training, stationed at Fort Hood. Your mother worked at a diner just off base. First time I saw her, she was giving some drunk colonel what for about being rude to her coworkers. They talked for hours, sharing stories and memories. Elena asked questions she'd never dared to before, about her mother's illness, about the war, about the discharge that had haunted their family for so long. Daniel answered each one honestly, feeling a weight lifting with every truth shared. As the kitchen grew dark, Elena made them both hot chocolate, her mother's special recipe with a dash of cinnamon. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge through the small window above the sink. "Things are going to be different now, aren't they?" Elena asked finally, cupping her mug with both hands. Daniel considered this. "I hope so, sweetheart. But even if they're not, even if I go back to being just a janitor, I know now that there's no shame in honest work. And more importantly, I know that you know that too. Ms. Whitmore won't let that happen," Elena said with surprising conviction. "I saw how she looked at you during your speech. She believes in you, Dad. And so do all those workers who stood up for you afterward." Daniel felt his cheeks warm slightly at the mention of Charlotte, remembering the pride in her eyes as he told his story. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the counter. He reached for it, seeing Charlotte's name on the screen. "Speaking of," he murmured, answering the call. "Hello? Daniel." Charlotte's voice was warm but professional. "I need you to meet me at the office first thing tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. sharp. Can you do that?" Daniel glanced at Elena, who was trying very hard to pretend she wasn't listening intently. "Of course. I'll be there." "Good. And Daniel?" Charlotte paused. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be an important day." The call ended, and Elena raised her eyebrows questioningly. Daniel shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "Looks like I need to set my alarm extra early tomorrow." Elena stood and hugged him again. This time gentler, but no less loving. "Whatever happens, Dad, I want you to know you don't have anything left to prove. Not to me, not to anyone. You're already my hero." Daniel held his daughter close, marveling at how life could change so completely. Just days ago, he'd felt weighed down by secrets and shame. Now, standing in his kitchen with his daughter's love and pride wrapped around him like a warm blanket, he felt lighter than he had in years. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. But tonight, in this moment, Daniel Reyes was simply a father embracing his daughter, their hearts full of hope and healing. The marble-floored conference room at Whitmore Aviation's headquarters buzzed with tension. Shareholders filled every seat, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across polished tables. Richard Hale stood at the podium, his expensive suit crisp and perfect, his silver hair neatly combed. A confident smirk played at the corners of his mouth as he adjusted his tie. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "we're here today because our company faces a crisis of leadership. Charlotte Whitmore has shown questionable judgment by elevating an unqualified janitor to a position of influence." In the front row, Charlotte sat straight-backed, her face a mask of calm. Daniel sat beside her, his borrowed tie slightly crooked, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Under the table, his fingers tapped nervously against his knee. Richard clicked through a series of slides on the large screen behind him. "Our stock has experienced concerning fluctuations. Our reputation built over decades is at risk. All because Miss Whitmore chose to champion someone whose background includes a dishonorable discharge." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he remained still. "Furthermore," Richard continued, producing a thick folder, "I have documentation showing multiple instances where company protocols were bypassed to accommodate Mr. Reyes' unusual position." He paused for effect. "Is this the kind of leadership we want? Someone who puts personal charity projects above shareholder interests?" Charlotte rose slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached the podium. Richard's smile faltered slightly as she placed her own folder on the lectern. "Mr. Hale speaks of protocols and reputations," she began, her voice clear and strong. "But let me show you some numbers he conveniently overlooked." She gestured to the screen, where new graphs appeared. "Since Daniel Reyes joined our team, efficiency in our maintenance division has increased by 30%. Employee satisfaction scores have risen to their highest levels in 5 years. She turned to face the shareholders directly. "But more importantly, let me tell you what happened yesterday. When Richard's smear campaign hit the papers, something extraordinary occurred." Charlotte nodded to someone at the back of the room. The doors opened, and people began filing in, dozens of them. Mechanics in work clothes, engineers in casual attire, office staff from various departments. They lined the walls of the conference room, standing tall. "These are the people who build our success," Charlotte continued. "Not the fancy titles or the corner offices, but the hands that keep our machines running and our dreams flying." A mechanic stepped forward, the same one who had thanked Daniel weeks ago. "Mr. Reyes taught me more in 2 weeks than I learned in 2 years of formal training," he said clearly. "He doesn't just fix machines. He teaches us how to be better at our jobs." Another worker spoke up. "When my daughter was sick, Mr. Reyes covered my shift without being asked. That's the kind of person he is." Richard's face reddened. "This is highly irregular. These people aren't shareholders." "No," Charlotte cut him off. "But they are the heart and soul of Whitmore Aviation. And they're here because they choose to be, on their own time, to support the kind of leadership they believe in. She pulled out a stack of papers. I also have here signed statements from our top 3 government contractors, praising the improvements in our maintenance protocols, improvements directly attributed to Daniel's input. The same Daniel Reyes who saved our demonstration flight, and quite possibly our largest contract. The shareholders were sitting up straighter now, paying close attention. Charlotte's voice grew softer, but no less powerful. My father founded this company believing that character matters more than credentials, that a person's worth isn't measured by their title, but by their actions and integrity. She turned to look at Daniel, who sat with quiet dignity. Daniel Reyes embodies everything we should value: hard work, honesty, and the courage to stand up after being knocked down. Richard attempted to interrupt, but Charlotte pressed on. Yes, he was discharged from the military, a decision that was later overturned when the truth came to light. He could have hidden that part of his past, but he chose to face it openly. That's the kind of integrity we need. She spread her hands, addressing the whole room. The choice before you today isn't just about leadership. It's about what kind of company we want to be. One that judges people by their pedigrees and past mistakes, or one that recognizes true worth, that values character over credentials? The room fell silent. Richard stood frozen, his carefully crafted attack crumbling before Charlotte's genuine passion and the visible support of the workers. The vote is yours, Charlotte concluded. But remember, we're not just deciding who runs this company. We're deciding who we are. The shareholders began their voting process, marking their ballots in thoughtful silence. The workers remained standing along the walls, a quiet testament to their support. Daniel sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead, carrying himself with the same quiet dignity he'd shown since his first day. When the votes were tallied, the head of the shareholder committee stood. The room held its breath as he cleared his throat. By a significant majority, he announced, the shareholders have voted to maintain current leadership under Charlotte Whitmore, with full reinstatement of all executive powers. The workers erupted in applause. Richard slumped in his chair, his face ashen. Charlotte stood tall at the podium, allowing herself a small smile of victory. 2 security guards flanked Richard Hale as he walked through the lobby of Whitmore Aviation. His face was red with anger, and his perfectly styled silver hair had fallen out of place. The guards kept a firm but professional grip on his arms as they guided him toward the exit. This is outrageous, Richard's voice echoed off the marble floors. I built this company alongside Charlotte's father. You can't do this to me. Workers gathered around the edges of the lobby, watching the scene unfold. Some held their phones up, recording the moment. Others whispered among themselves, sharing knowing looks. The maintenance staff, who had always been invisible to Richard, stood tall and proud. As the glass doors slid open, Richard tried one last time to maintain his dignity. He straightened his expensive suit jacket and lifted his chin. You'll regret this, all of you. The security guards released him outside the building. One of them handed him a cardboard box containing his personal belongings. Your building access has been revoked, Mr. Hale. Have a good day, sir. Inside, a cheer erupted from the gathered employees. The sound grew as more people joined in, cascading through the building like a wave. Word spread quickly through text messages and phone calls. Charlotte had won. The board's attempt to seize control had failed. In the cafeteria, mechanics hugged each other. In the engineering department, designers high-fived. The accounting team broke out into spontaneous applause. Years of Richard's condescension and bullying were finally over. Sarah from Human Resources rushed through the halls, her face glowing with excitement. Charlotte's back in full control. The shareholders voted overwhelmingly in her favor. The news reached the factory floor, where the workers who had known Daniel best celebrated the loudest. Mike, a veteran mechanic, wiped tears from his eyes. First time in 30 years I've seen the good guys win, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Up in the executive suite, Charlotte's assistant Jenny began clearing Richard's office. She took down his pretentious oil paintings and his wall of hunting trophies. Good riddance, she muttered, carefully wrapping his collection of crystal paperweights. Charlotte herself stood in the boardroom, still processing the victory. The same room where Richard had once mocked Daniel now felt different, cleaner somehow, as if a dark cloud had lifted. She ran her hand along the polished wood table, remembering all the battles fought here. The company's head of legal approached her with a stack of papers. The paperwork's ready, Ms. Whitmore. We've drafted a new company charter that emphasizes merit-based advancement and protection for whistleblowers. Charlotte nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Make sure it specifically prohibits discrimination based on previous employment positions. I never want anyone to face what Daniel did. Outside her window, she could see Richard's black luxury car pulling away from the curb. He had arrived that morning expecting to take control of the company. Now, he was leaving with nothing but a box of memorabilia and wounded pride. Her phone buzzed with messages of congratulations from shareholders and industry colleagues, but the one that caught her eye was from Elena, Daniel's daughter. Thank you for believing in my dad. The maintenance staff had gathered in their break room, sharing coffee and stories about Richard's worst moments. They'd endured years of his sneers and dismissive comments. Now they couldn't stop grinning. Remember when he made Johnson clean his office 3 times because he said he could smell the lower class? One janitor recalled. Well, look who's lower class now, another replied, and they all laughed. Throughout the building, people were already noticing changes. Middle managers who had imitated Richard's arrogant style suddenly became more approachable. Executive assistants who had feared his temper began to relax. The whole atmosphere felt lighter. Charlotte walked through the halls, accepting congratulations but moving with purpose. Workers reached out to shake her hand or pat her shoulder. Some just nodded respectfully, understanding the magnitude of what she'd accomplished. She passed the spot where Daniel had first demonstrated his repair techniques to skeptical mechanics. Now those same mechanics wore badges with character counts printed on them, a slogan that had emerged during the fight to save Daniel's reputation. The company's stock price was already rising as news of the shareholder vote spread. Analysts praised Charlotte's leadership and the company's new direction. Messages of support flooded in from customers and suppliers who had grown tired of Richard's heavy-handed approach. In the lobby, facilities staff were already removing Richard's portrait from the wall of company leaders. In its place, they hung a new mission statement that Charlotte had written: Excellence knows no title. Innovation knows no rank. Charlotte's heels clicked against the floor as she made her way to Daniel's office. Her victory wasn't just about keeping control of her company. It was about proving that character and skill mattered more than social status or job titles. She passed Richard's now empty office. The bare walls and clean desk seemed to symbolize the end of an era. No more old money politics. No more judgment based on background rather than ability. Workers straightened as she passed, but their smiles were genuine now, not fearful. She had shown them what real leadership looked like, standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. The morning sun streamed through the windows, making the hallway glow. Charlotte felt lighter than she had in weeks. The weight of the fight, the constant tension, had finally lifted. As she approached Daniel's office, her steps slowed slightly. Her eyes shone with relief, not just at winning the battle, but at knowing she had fought for the right reasons. She had defended not just Daniel, but everything she believed about human dignity and worth. Charlotte stood in the doorway of Daniel's temporary office, watching him pack his few belongings into a cardboard box. Her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the silver in his dark hair. Leaving so soon? She asked softly. Daniel looked up, a gentle smile crossing his weathered face. Figured it was time, but I wanted to thank you, Ms. Whitmore, for everything you've done. Charlotte, she corrected him, stepping into the office. And you're not going anywhere, Daniel? Not unless you want to. He paused, his hands resting on the box. I don't understand. Charlotte moved closer, perching on the edge of his desk. She smoothed her silk blouse, buying time to find the right words. I've been thinking about what you've brought to this company. Not just your technical skills, though those are remarkable. It's your leadership, your ability to connect with people. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, but he remained quiet, listening. I want to offer you a permanent position, Charlotte continued. Chief Advisor on Workforce Development. You'll oversee training programs, mentor mechanics, and help bridge the gap between management and our workers. Full benefits, of course, and a salary that reflects your expertise. Daniel sat heavily in his chair, running a hand over his face. That's quite an offer. It's not charity, Charlotte said firmly. You've earned this. The workers respect you. They trust you. That's something money can't buy. Some people won't like it, Daniel said quietly. There will still be those who see me as just a janitor. Charlotte's blue eyes flashed. Let them. We've proven that titles don't define capability. Besides, she added with a small smile, I rather enjoy shaking things up. Daniel looked around the office, taking in the view of the factory floor below. Workers moved about their tasks, some waving when they caught his eye. Elena will be thrilled, he said softly. She's always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. She's a wise young woman, Charlotte replied. Much like her father. Daniel stood and extended his hand. I accept. And thank you, Charlotte. Not just for the job, but for standing by me when it would have been easier not to. Charlotte took his hand, but instead of shaking it, she held it for a moment longer than necessary. You know, that helicopter breaking down might have been the best thing that ever happened to this company. Daniel chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. To think I almost called in sick that day. They spent the next hour discussing details, his new office, responsibilities, and ideas for improving worker training. Daniel's practical experience and Charlotte's business acumen complemented each other perfectly, creating solutions neither would have thought of alone. As the afternoon wore on, Daniel glanced at his watch. I should head home. Elena will be waiting, and I promised her takeout to celebrate. Charlotte nodded, understanding. Of course. Family comes first. That's going to be one of our new company values, by the way. Daniel gathered his things, this time not in a cardboard box but into his worn leather briefcase. As he reached the door, he turned back. You know, when my wife passed, I thought that was the end of my story. Just me and Elena, getting by day to day. I never expected. A second chance? Charlotte finished softly. Several second chances, it seems, he replied with a gentle smile. Later that evening, Daniel and Elena sat at their small kitchen table, surrounded by containers of Chinese food. Elena couldn't stop grinning as she picked up another pot sticker with her chopsticks. Chief advisor, she said for probably the 10th time. Dad, that's amazing! Daniel watched his daughter's face, seeing so much of her mother in her smile. It still doesn't feel quite real. But you deserve it, Elena insisted, reaching for the fried rice. Those stuck-up board members tried to tear you down, but you showed them who you really are. You didn't give up. We didn't give up, Daniel corrected her. Your faith in me helped more than you know, sweetheart. Elena's eyes softened. Mom would be so proud of you. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand. She'd be proud of both of us. We've come a long way from those rough days after she passed. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the small kitchen warm with contentment and the aroma of good food. Through the window, the evening sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. A beautiful ending to a life-changing day. So, Elena said with a mischievous glint in her eye. Ms. Whitmore seems nice. Daniel nearly choked on his noodles. Elena, what? I'm just saying. She grinned. She believed in you when nobody else would, and the way she looks at you? That's enough of that, Daniel said firmly, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. Let's just enjoy this moment, okay? New job, good food, and my favorite daughter. I'm your only daughter, Elena laughed, throwing a fortune cookie at him. Daniel caught it easily, cracking it open. The small paper inside read, New beginnings are often disguised as painful endings. He smiled, tucking the fortune into his pocket, looking at Elena's happy face across their small table, at the homework spread out beside her plate, at the familiar photos of their family on the walls. Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. Their little world, which had seemed so limited just months ago, had suddenly expanded with possibilities. The morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect for flying. Charlotte stood by the gleaming helicopter on the airfield's tarmac, the same one Daniel had fixed all those weeks ago. She smoothed her silk blouse, fighting back an unexpected flutter of nerves as she watched Daniel's old pickup truck pull into the parking lot. Elena bounded out first, her dark hair catching the sunlight. The teenager's eyes were wide with excitement as she took in the helicopter. Daniel followed more slowly, wearing a pressed button-down shirt that made him look different from both the janitor she'd first met and the executive he'd become. This is so cool, Elena exclaimed, practically bouncing on her toes. We're really going up in that? Charlotte nodded, enjoying the girl's enthusiasm. Your father saved this helicopter once. I thought it was time for a proper thank you ride. Daniel ran his hand along the helicopter's sleek side, his touch gentle and knowing. She's looking good. Regular maintenance schedule? Twice what's required, Charlotte confirmed. I learned my lesson about cutting corners. The pilot, Sarah, emerged from the pre-flight check with a thumbs up. We're ready when you are, Miss Whitmore. They climbed aboard, Elena claiming a window seat with the eagerness only a teenager could muster. Daniel settled beside his daughter, while Charlotte took the seat across from them. The interior still carried that subtle leather scent she'd always associated with power and success, but somehow it felt different now, warmer, more welcoming. As the rotors began to spin, Charlotte caught Daniel watching the mechanics with professional interest. He'd taught them all so much about attention to detail, about taking pride in their work regardless of their position. The whole company culture had shifted because of him. The helicopter lifted smoothly into the air. Elena pressed her face against the window, watching the ground fall away beneath them. Dad, look! I can see the whole town! Daniel leaned over to share her view, and Charlotte found herself studying them both. The shadows that had haunted Daniel's eyes when she'd first met him had softened. He looked younger somehow, more at peace. Elena had bloomed too, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew their parent was respected and valued. Remember that first morning? Charlotte asked, raising her voice slightly over the engine's hum. When none of my highly paid mechanics could figure out what was wrong? Daniel chuckled. Hard to forget. I almost didn't speak up. But you did, Charlotte said softly. You changed everything that day. The helicopter banked gently, offering a spectacular view of the countryside below. Fields stretched out in patchwork patterns, morning mist still clinging to the valleys. Elena pointed out landmarks, her school, the park where she and her father sometimes had weekend picnics, the cemetery where her mother rested. Charlotte watched Daniel squeeze his daughter's hand at that last one, saw the quiet understanding pass between them. They'd both grown so much stronger, but they'd done it together. The company's different now, Charlotte continued, thinking aloud. Better. The board meetings actually discuss real issues, instead of just status and politics. The mechanics teach each other new skills instead of hoarding knowledge to protect their positions. Even the cleaning staff makes suggestions about improving efficiency, and people listen. That's all you, Daniel protested modestly. You were willing to stand up for what's right. Because you reminded me what that meant, Charlotte replied. I'd forgotten somewhere along the way, getting caught up in quarterly reports and stock prices. The helicopter crested a hill, and the sunrise painted the sky in brilliant golds and pinks. Elena gasped at the beauty of it, and Charlotte saw Daniel watching his daughter with such love it made her throat tight. Look at that view, Daniel murmured. Makes you realize how small our problems really are. Charlotte nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. From up here, the lines between executives and janitors disappeared. Status meant nothing against the vastness of the sky. They flew over the small airfield where it had all begun. It looked tiny from above, but Charlotte would never see it as insignificant again. That single morning had transformed not just her company, but her understanding of what truly mattered in life. The helicopter began a gentle arc that would take them back to their starting point. Elena had fallen quiet, content now to simply soak in the experience. Daniel's hand still held hers, their fingers intertwined in that unconscious way of family. Charlotte felt something shift in her chest, a final piece falling into place. She'd built her company on the belief that she had to be tough, untouchable, alone. But Daniel had shown her a different kind of strength, one built on honesty, humility, and connection. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming them all. Charlotte watched it play across Daniel's face, highlighting the laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of joy despite hardship. She thought about how far they'd all come since that first morning, the battles they'd fought, the truths they'd faced, the trust they'd built. As the helicopter glided over the horizon, Charlotte whispered to herself, but loud enough for Daniel to hear, "You didn't just fix my helicopter. You fixed my heart." Daniel smiled, taking Elena's hand, as the horizon stretched endlessly before them, full of hope and new beginnings. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Reyes, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.